Chapter 1858. SS Immortal Chi and Immortal Crystals. This is. The master of Tyene stared at the stone pillar in the middle of the open space with a puzzled expression. Do Hua stared at the stone pillar in front of him with a burning gaze. He said softly, "This place is indeed as recorded in the ancient books in the temple. There is a central stone pillar, and under this stone pillar is the core energy of the strange beast. It also contains the origin of the heavenly armor planet. The immortal Chi on the heavenly armor continent comes from here. In addition, there is also the inheritance of that powerful strange beast. Everyone, lend me a hand. With the jade deity's bird-shaped ritual implement as a guide, we can open this stone pillar." As he spoke, Do Hua once again tossed the jade deity human bird-shaped artifact into the air. With a swoosh, the artifact turned into an afterimage and swept towards the top of the stone pillar. Instantly, an extremely shocking radiance erupted from the surface of the stone pillar. Extremely terrifying and violent white mist gushed out from the stone pillar and spread in all directions. This is immortal Chi? What rich immortal Chi! The four lords of the battlefield took a deep breath, and their expressions changed. Not only the four masters of the battlefield, but everyone else also looked shocked. There was no other reason than the density of this immortal Chi far exceeded the immortal pool that the Chaos Temple had taken out. The surging immortal Chi soared into the sky and turned into a white pillar that pierced through the sky. The moment this white pillar rushed into the sky, the wind and clouds in the sky began to swirl, and then this immortal Chi spread to the entire planet. The originally khaki-colored planet was full of decadence and desolation, but as the immortal Chi spread throughout the entire planet, the decadent planet slowly glowed with vitality. After entering the khaki-colored planet, Zhuowen and the others suddenly discovered that the originally decadent yellow earth around them had sprouted tender buds, and these buds were growing rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, they grew into towering trees. In the blink of an eye, the wasteland with a radius of tens of thousands of feet became verdant and lush with green forests, lingering clouds, and flowing waterfalls. It was like a fairyland. "Look over there." Ji Wubbing pointed at the white pillar in the distance that shot straight into the sky, his eyes blazing with passion. Not only Ji Wubbing, but the others also had the same expression. "What rich immortal Chi! What on earth is going on over there?" Zhuowen squinted his eyes and exchanged glances with the first mountain god. With a swoosh, he disappeared from where he stood. Ji Wubbing and the other four gods were not to be outdone. The immortal Chi that suddenly spread throughout the entire planet was definitely not for no reason. This must have something to God Do Hua and the others. As long as one wasn't an idiot, one would know that there must be a great treasure over there to give off such a strong immortal Chi. When Zhuowen's group finally arrived at the spacious area where Divine Master Do Hua's group was, they discovered a mysterious stone pillar standing in the middle of the spacious area. Immortal Chi was gushing out from within the stone pillar. The arrival of Zhuowen and the others naturally attracted the attention of God Do Hua and the others. Among them, God Do Hua and Elder Gu only glanced at Zhuowen and didn't pay any more attention to him. Among the four lords of the battlefield, only the Lord of Tyene smiled coldly at Tu. The others were expressionless. As for Yang Yi, he had his hands behind his back and didn't look at Zhuowen at all. Instead, he focused all his attention on the stone pillar. The burly man beside him grinned at Zhuowen. Zhuowen stared at the burly man with a solemn expression. This burly man had chased him until he was in a sorry state. Zhuowen and the first mountain god silently came to the side of the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum and Shiji. Their eyes fell on the stone pillar. The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum took a deep look at Hyun. After a moment of silence, he suddenly transmitted his voice. "Hyun, that Lord has told you all the important things, right?" Hyun was silent for a moment and nodded. When Sangjia said that the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum and Shiji would help him, he knew that the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum and Shiji had already contacted Sangjia. It was just that he had been kept in the dark. "Hyun, whether we can save Lord Sangjia or not depends on you," the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum said seriously. Hyun took a deep breath and cupped his fists at the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum. He replied, "Senior, don't worry. Junior will do his best." After that, Yuan looked at the stone pillar again and whispered, "Is the thing hidden under this stone pillar the thing that Senior Cangjie mentioned?" The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum nodded. Then he glanced at Yang Yi and said, "If that thing really comes out, you should be careful of Yang Yi, not Do Hua. He's not simple." Hearing this, Zhuowen's pupils shrank. From the tone of the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum, Yuan could hear a hint of fear. Even the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum was afraid of Yang Yi. It seemed that Yang Yi was not simple. Zhuan recalled that he had never seen through Yang Yi since the first time he met him. This person was like a cloud of fog. After one layer of fog was removed, another layer of fog would appear. It was as if there was no end to it. Zhuowen even suspected that the name Yang Yi was a fake name. There was no way to know his real identity. "Let's work together." The Jade God's bird-shaped celestial device is the key to opening this stone pillar. Only by gathering more power can we completely destroy this stone pillar, Do Hua suddenly said to the others. The eyes of the others flickered. They simply poured their power into the celestial device. Because of the precedent of opening Devour's body, they didn't have any difficulty in cooperating. Boom! Not long after, the stone pillar collapsed and turned into dust. Then, a natural abyss was formed at the bottom of the shattered stone pillar. Whoosh, whoosh. The moment the abyss appeared, several black shadows suddenly rushed out. These black shadows were about the size of a palm. They were so fast that they almost turned into afterimages. Do Hua waved his right hand and immediately grabbed one of the black shadows. He flipped his right hand and found a sparkling and translucent crystal lying quietly in his palm. The surface of the crystal was milky white and was dense with extremely powerful immortal qi. Immortal crystal, and it's the best immortal crystal. Do Hua's eyes narrowed slightly as he murmured in a low voice. At the same time, more and more black shadows rushed out of the abyss. Each of them represented a immortal crystal. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. For a moment, the first corpse king, Ji Wubbing, and the others immediately used their movement techniques to collect the immortal crystals that rushed out. Their eyes were full of enthusiasm. Every immortal crystal that rushed out of the abyss was the best immortal crystal. The quality was much higher than the immortal crystals they had obtained in the central region. Not only Ji Wubbing and the others, but even the four lords of the battlefield couldn't hold back and used their movement techniques to collect all the immortal crystals that rushed out of the abyss. Then, everyone took action. The Divine Lord Do Hua, Elder Gu, Yang Yi, and the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum also took action. Immortal crystals were too scarce on the Heavenly Armor continent, and these experts whose cultivation had reached the Immortal Saint level needed the immortal qi in the immortal crystals to cultivate. In addition, the quality of the immortal crystals that rushed out of the abyss was much higher than on the Heavenly Armor continent. No one could remain calm and not fight for them. Yun was naturally in the ranks of those fighting for the immortal crystals. Because Yun was supported by Dao Will, his speed was comparable to that of a true immortal. He was even faster than the four lords of the battlefield, who were early true immortals. At this moment, the Lord of Taiyin rushed in front of a black figure and reached out with his right hand, wanting to grab the black figure. Unfortunately, the moment the Lord of Taiyin extended his right hand, the black figure was already caught by another hand. Then, with a violent tug, the immortal crystal was taken away. The Lord of Taiyin's face stiffened, and his entire body froze on the spot. Then, his expression changed uncertainly. He suddenly looked at the figure that had taken his immortal crystal and said coldly, the person who had suddenly appeared and taken the Lord of Taiyin's immortal crystal was none other than Zhu. However, when he felt the cold gazes of the first mountain god and Shiji, the Lord of Taiyin's original desire to attack was finally restrained. Moreover, the Lord of Taiyin was shocked to discover that Zhuowen's cultivation had reached the late sky immortal realm at some point. How did this brat's cultivation advance so quickly? The Lord of Taiyin took a deep breath and calmed down. However, the more he thought about it, the more shocked he became. Zhuowen's speed of advancement was too fast, and it actually made him feel slightly threatened. This time, I must find a chance to completely kill this brat. Otherwise, he'll be a disaster in the future. The Lord of Taiyin's expression darkened as he thought to himself. Then, he rushed toward another immortal crystal that had flown out. Unfortunately, when the Lord of Tyene was about to approach the immortal crystal, Yuan beat him to it again and snatched it away. The Lord of Tyene clenched his fists and suppressed his anger as he continued to search for the next immortal crystal. In the next dozen or so attempts, the Lord of Tyene basically didn't get a single immortal crystal. This was because every time he was about to make a move, Yuan would always snatch the immortal crystal that caught his eye first. This also caused the Lord of Tyene to end up with nothing. What infuriated the Lord of Tyene even more was that Zhuowen's speed was just too fast. He was always able to snatch the immortal crystals before him. Naturally, the scene that the Lord of Tyene was seen by many people in the surroundings. Their gazes were filled with mockery as they watched the game of cat and mouse between Zhuan and the Lord of Tyene. The Lord of Tyene naturally felt the many mocking gazes directed at him from all around. His face turned pale and green with anger. He almost lost his mind as he roared at Zhuan, "Little bastard, you're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" Zhuan stopped not far away from the Lord of Tyene. He calmly looked at the Lord of Tyene, who was about to go berserk. He smiled and said, "Yes, I'm doing this on purpose. If you don't want to admit defeat, come and bite me." The Lord of Tyene's expression froze. Then his eyes spat fire. In an instant, he threw away all of his rationality and charged toward Zhuan like a wild beast. Zhuan calmly looked at the approaching Lord of Tyene. He didn't retreat or run away. Instead, his gaze was filled with mockery. When the Lord of Tyene was about to reach Zhuan, a stalwart figure blocked in front of Zhuan. Then this figure violently threw a punch. The wind from the punch was like a dragon. The space exploded as it charged directly toward the Lord of Tyene's face. The Lord of Tyene's expression changed slightly. He waved his sleeve and countless Yin Qi gathered in front of him, forming a Yin Qi shield. Bang! Chapter 1859. French. You're courting death. The first mountain god's eyes were cold as he stepped forward. He didn't give the Master of Lunar Master a chance to explain and punched him again. This punch was even more terrifying than the previous one. The Master of Lunar Master's expression changed drastically. In his opinion, the first mountain god was a powerhouse on the same level as Do Hua. He didn't dare to fight him head-on. At the thought of this, the Master of Lunar Master suddenly retreated to where Do Hua, the Master of Lunar Master, was. When Do Hua saw this, he naturally wouldn't ignore it. He pointed with his right finger, and a blazing starlight fell and heavily collided with the first mountain god's punch. Boom! There was a dull explosion, and then Do Hua and the first mountain god both took a few steps back. Do Hua stared at the first mountain god in shock. Clearly, he didn't expect the first mountain god's combat power to be so terrifying. He couldn't help but say, "Brother, now is not the time for internal strife. When we enter the abyss later, we need to help each other." The first mountain god looked at Do Hua with fear but didn't say anything. Instead, he slowly retreated to Zhuowen's side and said calmly, "If the Master of Lunar Master's hands and feet are not clean next time, I don't mind chopping off his hands and feet." The Master of Lunar Master's eyes were gloomy, but he didn't dare to refute. He was indeed not as strong as the first mountain god, but in his heart, he hated Zhuowen even more. This was just a small disturbance. Following that, everyone silently collected the immortal crystals that had been swept out of the abyss. After about an hour, there were no more immortal crystals coming out of the abyss, and the surroundings of the abyss were much quieter. All of them revealed expressions of satisfaction. During this period of time, all of them had gained quite a bit. Most of them had obtained over 1,000 immortal crystals, whereas experts like Do Hua and the Master of the Divine Tomb had obtained close to 10,000. This was only the immortal crystals from the abyss. Everyone knew that there must be even more immortal crystals inside the abyss. For a moment, everyone looked at the abyss with burning eyes. This abyss was undoubtedly a huge treasure trove. Everyone be careful. This abyss isn't as calm as it looks. After Do Hua reminded Elder Gu, he and Elder Gu turned into two streaks of light and directly entered the deep abyss at an extremely fast speed. Yang Yi and the others followed closely behind, followed by the four lords of the battlefield. The Lord of the Divine Tomb, Shiji, Zhuan, and the others also entered the abyss. The abyss was extremely dark. However, after descending for a few hundred feet, Zhuowen discovered that there was actually a sparkling white light below. At the same time as they descended, the immortal qi below also became denser and denser. It made people feel relaxed and happy just by smelling it. Everyone continued to dive, and when they reached a depth of 3,000 meters, the lustrous white light had already reached an extremely dense level. Soon after, Zhuowen discovered that the surrounding walls were actually embedded with extremely large immortal crystals. These immortal crystals were no longer the size of a palm. Instead, they were extremely irregular in shape. The smallest among them was the size of a wash basin, while the largest was several zhang in size. It was simply like a huge rock. Do Hua, the lord of the divine tomb, and everyone else were stunned as they stared blankly at the immortal crystals scattered all over the walls. They didn't expect there to be so many immortal crystals here. This is an immortal crystal vein. Do Hua murmured in a low voice. The surroundings were very quiet, and one could even hear everyone's suppressed breathing. Such a huge immortal crystal vein was enough to cause countless experts to go crazy over it. After all, such a terrifying immortal crystal vein had never appeared on the heavenly armor continent, not even in ancient times. Moreover, the bottom of the vein was like a bottomless pit, as if there was no end to it. It was enough to show how huge the vein was. Wei Wuyin, Ji Wubing, the first corpse king, Kong Lianshuan, and Dong Fangxin's eyes suddenly turned red and crazy. Then, the five of them completely ignored Do Hua and the others in front of them and rushed toward the immortal crystals around them. These are all top-grade immortal crystals. One of them is equivalent to several of those immortal crystals on the heavenly armor continent. We're rich. These immortal crystals are enough to help me break through to the true immortal realm. To be able to obtain so many immortal crystals, this trip to the ancient battlefield is worth it. The five of them began to dig the immortal crystals around them with blazing eyes, as if they were crazy. The four lords of the battlefield behind Do Hua were also a little restless. If it weren't for Do Hua's silence, the four of them would probably have frantically dug out the surrounding immortal crystal veins like Ji Wubing and the other four. Let's continue. Do Hua glanced at the five of them indifferently, and then rushed down. Yang Yi, the other two, and the Lord of the Divine Tomb followed without hesitation. Although Zhuowen was also very tempted by the immortal crystals around them, he knew that the most precious thing in the depths of the earth was not these immortal crystals, but the infant of Devour that Song Jie mentioned. He knew very well that once they found the infant of Devour, they would completely fall out with each other. However, before Zhuowen left, he released the perfect saint physique and ordered it to collect as many immortal crystals around them as possible. After collecting enough immortal crystals, he would come back to join them. After diving to a distance of 100,000 feet underground, the number of immortal crystals slowly decreased. At the same time, they reached the bottom, but there was nothing at the bottom. Everyone looked at Do Hua, as if asking for his opinion. Do Hua looked at Goddess Yen Tianwei and said in a deep voice, "Goddess, we are already very close to the inner part of this planet. What should we do next with your divination holy rune?" Yen Tianwei's eyes flickered, and she nodded slightly. Then, she spat out the divination holy rune, and her right hand continuously formed hand seals and pointed at the surface of the divination holy rune. Zhuowen stared at Yen Tianwei silently. He knew that Yen Tianwei had the divination holy rune and could communicate with its power. She had the ability to predict the future. Back then, when he was in the central region, he was limited everywhere. It was probably because of Yen Tianwei's schemes. Suddenly, Yen Tianwei's face changed slightly, and her eyes revealed a painful look. She spat out a mouthful of blood and couldn't help but fall back. Yang Yi stretched out his right hand and hugged Yen Tianwei in his arms. At the same time, a surge of power passed from Yang Yi's palm into Yen Tianwei's body. Yen Tianwei, who was originally pale, looked a little better. Do Hua's eyes narrowed. He looked at Yen Tianwei and said in a deep voice, "Goddess, what happened?" Everyone's eyes gathered on Goddess Yen Tianwei, and they all had different expressions. Yen Tianwei calmed down, and then fear appeared in her eyes. she said in a deep voice. We can't go any deeper. Just now, I used the divination holy rune's power and used all my strength to predict that there is a hidden power that can destroy heaven and earth. If we go any deeper, I feel that we will all die. Everyone's heart trembled. Do Hua narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, You mean that we still need to go deeper? Do Hua pointed with his right hand, and a ray of starlight burst out from his fingertip. The ray of starlight condensed to the extreme, and finally formed a large spiral. Do Hua gently pointed forward, and the spiral of starlight turned into a huge whirlwind of starlight that blasted the ground under his feet. Rumble! Suddenly, the entire ground shook violently, and then countless cracks appeared on the ground under everyone's feet. Are you crazy? Yen Tianwei's eyes narrowed. She immediately retreated and said, It's too dangerous down there. I won't go any deeper with you. Yen Tianwei stomped her right foot and flew up. Clearly, she did not intend to participate in this matter. Do Hua did not stop Yen Tianwei from leaving. Since he already knew the answer, it did not affect him much whether Yen Tianwei followed or not. Break! Do Hua stomped his right foot, and the cracks on the ground became denser and denser. In the end, it completely shattered into pieces. Rumble! The moment the ground shattered, a terrifying aura like that of a primeval beast swept out, turning into a destructive storm that swept out from below. Do Hua's eyes narrowed. He stomped his right foot, and starlight covered his body as he tried his best to resist the storm formed by the terrifying aura. The surrounding people also activated their own defenses to resist the terrifying storm. Zhuan formed a huge gate of reincarnation with the underworld water droplets that surrounded him, resisting the terrifying aura with difficulty. What kind of creature's aura is this? How can it be so terrifying? Zhuan's face changed slightly, but he soon remembered Sangjia's warning. Could it be that the thing below was really Devour's infant? The aura only lasted for a moment, and then it gradually faded away. Then, a hole appeared below the shattered ground. All of a sudden, Do Hua took a step forward and entered the hole. When the others were about to enter the hole, Do Hua threw out the Jade Deity Man's bird-shaped celestial device. The celestial device divided into 3 parts. The bird-shaped celestial device let out a clear cry and turned into a giant bird that landed on the other side of the hole. It spread its wings and directly sealed the hole. Do Hua's series of actions immediately changed the faces of the 4 lords of the battlefield, while the Lord of the Tomb God and Yang Yi watched this scene quietly. Senior, what should we do? Zhuan asked with a frown. The Lord of the Tomb God shook his head and looked at Elder Gu, who was not far away. Yang Yi also looked at Elder Gu and said indifferently, Elder Gu, I think you should explain what's going on. Elder Gu narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, I don't know about this. All the ancient books in the Divine Temple are controlled by the Divine Master. I don't know why the Divine Master is doing this, and I don't know what's below. Still want to quibble? Yang Yi sneered. The big man behind him also sneered and took a step forward, rushing toward Elder Gu. Yang Yi, what do you mean? Why don't you go after the Divine Master, but attack me instead? Elder Gu's eyes were gloomy. He made a series of hand seals. Suddenly, a terrifying mental power burst out and formed a formation in front of him, forming an invisible defensive barrier. Seeing this, the Lord of the Tomb God frowned. Yang Yi's series of actions showed that he was prepared to deal with Elder Gu. Chapter 1860. Giant Chlorumble. The burly man punched the invisible barrier, causing it to crumble inch by inch and shatter into pieces. Elder Gu's eyes were gloomy as he quickly formed a series of hand seals. Terrifying mind energy surged out and formed a formation diagram in the air. Million formation diagram. Elder Gu pushed his hands forward, and a formation diagram formed by 10,000 strands of mind energy swept out. The burly man laughed sinisterly, and a terrifying black fog gushed out of his body. The black fog condensed into ferocious bone spikes that clashed with the million formation diagram. However, the black fog grew thicker and thicker, and the burly man's figure disappeared. He was almost completely shrouded by the black fog. The black fog suddenly turned into a giant mouth that covered the sky. Under Elder Gu's shocked gaze, it swallowed the million formation diagram along with Elder Gu. The million formation diagram and Elder Gu were swallowed in the blink of an eye. The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum, Zhuon, and Shiji did not even have time to react. By the time they realized what had happened, Elder Gu had already disappeared into the giant mouth. That's heavenly worm? Zhuon's eyes narrowed as he stared at the giant mouth that had shrunk into the black fog. He could not help but exclaim. No wonder the burly man gave him a familiar feeling. It turned out that he was the incarnation of Heavenly Worm. The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum's expression also changed. He stared coldly at the black fog and Yang Yi and said in a low voice, Yang Yi, you've got guts. How dare you release Heavenly Worm? Don't you know that Heavenly Worm was one of the disasters from 10,000 years ago? I know, but so what? Yang Yi smiled faintly. Little guy, we meet again. Back then, you made my clone quite miserable. If there's a chance, I'll settle this debt with you. The black fog churned beside Yang Yi, and a pair of scarlet eyes stared at Chun. A sinister voice slowly rang out, as piercing as an owl's cry. Since you've released Heavenly Worm, I have no reason not to attack you. The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum had a dark look in his eyes. With a wave of his right hand, the 4 true immortal Dao armaments behind him turned into 4 streaks of light that surrounded Yang Yi and Skyworm. Yang Yi looked around at the 4 true immortal Dao soldiers, then threw his head back and laughed out loud. For dogs cultivated by Zhongjie, and you, the only disciple of Zhongjie, do you really think you can stop me? Although you're a demigod in name, you're actually just a fake demigod who's occupying the body of the deceased demigod Xiaoyu. Fushi, you've already become neither human nor ghost. What's the point of living in this world? Yang Yi laughed maniacally. Countless gusts of wind swept up around him. These gusts of wind had the power to shatter the void. In an instant, the void around Yang Yi was completely shattered. Then, Yang Yi and Skyworm disappeared into the shattered void. The sacrifice has walked into the trap. What we need to do now is to wait for the real devourer to hatch. What's funny is that Do Hua thought that the Jade God humanoid bird celestial device was the key to Devour's larva that Zhongjie left behind. He never thought that it was the key to his death. Is destined to be an insignificant sacrifice. When Yang Yi disappeared into the shattered void, an illusory voice came from the shattered void and exploded in Zhuon's ears. Before Zhuon could even digest Yang Yi's words, a miserable scream came from below. Zhuon was not unfamiliar with this voice. It was the voice of Do Hua, who had entered the underground before. The miserable scream became more and more miserable and loud. Finally, when the scream came to an abrupt end, the entire underground began to tremble violently. Then, countless cracks appeared on the surrounding barrier, as if it would shatter at any time. What's going on? Zhuon's eyes revealed a touch of horror. Then, he looked at the Lord of the Divine Tomb in front of him and asked in a deep voice, Senior, are you really Fushi? Was what Yang Yi said just now true? The Lord of the Divine Tomb fell silent and sighed. We'll talk about this later. It's not good to stay here for long. Let's leave this place. In the end, we were one step behind. No one expected that Yang Yi would release the heavenly insect, and that Jade Deity Man's bird-shaped magic artifact was actually Yang Yi's secret weapon. I was careless. As he spoke, the Lord of the Divine Tomb opened his arms and a gust of wind swept up from the surroundings. Instantly, Toan, Shiji, and the first mountain god were enveloped in it, and in an instant, they swept toward the top of the cave at an extremely fast speed. Wei Wuyin, Ji Wubbing, and the other 4, who were originally crazily snatching the immortal crystals above, also sensed the terrifying movement below. Their faces changed slightly, but they suppressed the greed in their hearts and left the cave one after another. As for the 4 lords of the battlefield, they had long fled upward when they realized that something was wrong. Rumble! Suddenly, from the depths of the underground, a terrifying giant claw that blotted out the sky suddenly stretched out toward the top. Its speed was extremely fast, as if it had transcended time and space. The 4 lords of the battlefield were too slow. Before they could even react, they were caught by the giant claw and exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Even their nascent spirits could not escape. A gust of wind whistled past, and the giant claw followed closely behind. At this moment, Wei Wuyin, Ji Wubing, the first corpse king, Kong Lianxuan, and Dong Fangxin had already swept out of the cave and flew into the sky. They stared at the depths of the cave in horror. With their keen senses, they naturally sensed that in the deepest part of the cave, there was a force that could destroy any of them. It was constantly approaching the entrance of the cave. This unknown force made the five of them extremely uneasy. "We can't stay here for long. Let's get out of here quickly." At this moment, another figure swept out of the cave. It was Zhuowen's perfect sacred body. His face was full of fear. Through the perception of his original body, the sacred body naturally knew what had happened underground. "Zhuowen, what's going on down there?" Ji Wubing asked in a deep voice. "If you don't want to die, hurry up and leave. The four lords of the battlefield are dead, and the divine Lord Do Hua is also doomed. If you don't leave, I'm afraid you will follow in their footsteps," Zhuowen's sacred body said in a deep voice. "What? The divine lord and the four lords of the battlefield are also dead? How is that possible?" The five people's pupils shrank into needles. They couldn't believe it. The first corpse king's eyes were gloomy as he said, "Nonsense. Whether it is the divine lord or the four lords of the battlefield, they are all true immortals. How could they die? Are you trying to scare the five of us so that you can take the fairy crystals alone?" Believe it or not, Zhuowen's sacred body was too lazy to argue with the first corpse king. The first corpse king, Wei Wuyin, and Kong Lianxuan suddenly glanced at each other. Then, with great tacit understanding, they rushed toward Zhuowen's sacred body from three directions. As soon as the three of them attacked, they used their most powerful moves, hoping to kill Zhuowen with one blow. Ji Wubing and Dong Fangxin frowned slightly. In the end, they didn't step into the muddy water. Instead, they turned into two long rainbows and left the planet. Their intuition told them that the planet was now very dangerous and they couldn't stay for long. Zhuowen's sacred body stared at the first corpse king, Wei Wuyin, and Kong Lianxuan. His eyes were full of killing intent. Zhuowen had kindly reminded the three of them, but the three of them didn't know what was good for them and wanted to kill Zhuowen. "Zhuowen, I have always remembered the hatred in the underground maze. Today, I will take your dog life," the first corpse king said with a ferocious face. "With the three of us working together, you are dead meat," Wei Wuyin said with a murderous look. Kong Lianxuan was silent, but from his sneer, it could be seen that he had the same idea as the first corpse king and Wei Wuyin. The three of them came at an extremely tricky angle, blocking all of Zhuowen's escape routes. Zhuowen could only face the three of them head-on. Zhuowen took a deep breath, and his whole body flashed with a dark golden light. His right hand continued to slide in front of him, instantly drawing 9 golden runes. Then, Zhuowen punched the 9 golden runes, and the 9 golden runes turned into 9 golden dragons. They rushed toward Wei Wuyin and the others with the momentum of 9 dragons swallowing a pearl. "It's useless. After all, your doppelganger is weaker than your original body. Even if your original body came, I'm afraid you can't stop the three of us working together, let alone this doppelganger." Wei Wuyin smiled eerily. Immediately, the three of them attacked. Suddenly, the 9 golden dragons collapsed. The perfect sacred body groaned, and his face was slightly pale. However, the moment the 9 dragons shattered, Zhuowen's sacred body jumped directly into the endless abyss behind him. He could feel that his original body was about to come up. "Where are you going?" The three of them chased closely. However, not long after the three of them rushed into the cave, the terrifying vibration became more and more violent. It made the three of them stop, and they didn't dare to chase. Kong Lianxuan frowned and said, "Maybe what this guy said is right. I'm afraid something big has happened down there. Let's go quickly." The first corpse king and Wei Wuyin looked at each other and nodded. The attack just now was enough to seriously injure Zhuowen's doppelganger. If he fell to the bottom of the abyss, he would probably die. The three of them didn't need to go into the abyss and take the risk. However, just as the three of them were about to leave the abyss, a gust of wind roared. This gust of wind swept up Zhuowen's sacred body, and Zhuowen's original body looked extremely cold. He stared coldly at Wei Wuyin and the others. The three of them naturally saw Zhuan and the master of the tomb god in the gust of wind. Their faces suddenly stiffened, and they knew something was wrong. Originally, the three of them thought that Zhuan's original body would let the master of the tomb god kill the three of them. However, they found that the gust of wind swept past them without stopping. What's going on? He didn't attack us? Kong Lianshuan said in surprise. Humph! That Zhuan is just a celestial immortal. How could he have the ability to order the master of the tomb god to attack? The first corpse king sneered. Wei Wuyin nodded in agreement. When he was about to speak, suddenly, a giant claw stretched out. Wei Wuyin directly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Kong Lianshuan and the first corpse king's pupils shrank. When they were about to shout and retreat, the giant claw directly penetrated their bodies. The two of them died without a sound. Chapter 1861. Larva devour the wind howled, instantly taking Zhuan, the lord of the divine tomb, and the others away from the khaki planet. However, not long after Zhuan's group left, the abyss under the khaki planet suddenly burst open, forming a huge hole that covered 1/5 of the entire planet. From within this gigantic hole, that gigantic claw stretched out. With a gentle wave, the yellow planet crumbled. The countless immortal crystals within the planet scattered out in all directions, exploding into balls of dense immortal chi one after another. The immortal energy was so dense that it almost formed a terrifying hurricane, spreading in all directions like angry dragons. After the khaki-colored planet crumbled, a huge exotic beast slowly emerged from the countless fragments of the planet. Zhuan's eyes fell on the strange beast, and his pupils shrank. He found that this strange beast's appearance was very similar to the adult devourer in the outside world. It also had 12 long horns, but its size was much smaller than the adult devourer. Although Zhuan didn't know much about devour, he knew that this strange beast in front of him was the larva devourer that Songjie had mentioned. It was also the next generation of the adult devourer. At this moment, the jade deity humanoid bird-shaped magic tool hovered quietly above Devour's head. Streams of jade-colored light poured into Devour's body from the magic tool. Devour's eyes revealed a comfortable look. Then, it opened its mouth and sucked, swallowing the magic tool. Zhuan stared at the jade deity humanoid bird-shaped magic tool. He thought of the god lord, Do Hua, who was holding the magic tool. He knew that Do Hua was probably like what Yang Yi had said. The moment he entered the khaki planet, he became a sacrifice for the larva devourer. Devourer indifferently glanced at Zhuan's group in the distance. Then, 8 vortexes suddenly appeared on its body. Each of these 8 vortexes was as big as several planets, and they were arranged in 8 directions around Devour. 8 extremely terrifying suction forces came from the 8 vortexes. Then, the surrounding planets began to sway. The nearby planets involuntarily flew toward the vortexes, disappearing into them. This guy is swallowing the planets in the adult devourer's body. This devouring power is too terrifying. Let's go. The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum's face changed slightly. He waved his sleeve, and the wind around him became even more terrifying. Then, it swept toward the wound on the adult devourer's body. The infant devourer lay quietly in the center of the 8 vortexes. Of course, it saw the group of the master of the divine tomb running away. A gleam of disdain and ridicule crossed its eyes, but it didn't chase after them. Instead, it observed quietly. At this moment, hundreds of millions of feet away from the infant devourer, Dong Fangxin and Ji Wubing were flying silently. When they approached a blue planet in front of them, they were shocked to find that the planet was shaking violently. Then, the huge planet was like a ball that was thrown out and swept behind them. At the same time, an unimaginably terrifying suction force instantly descended upon the two of them. What kind of power is this? Why is the suction force so terrifying? Ji Wubing's pupils shrank to the size of needles. He growled and exerted all his strength, spreading powerful celestial core power under his feet to resist the suction force coming from behind him. Dong Fangxin, who was beside him, did the same. But even though they tried their best, they still found that they were constantly being pushed back, and as the suction force grew stronger and stronger, the speed of their retreat became faster and faster. Suddenly, a huge planet appeared in front of the two of them. The planet was charging straight at them. "No!" Ji Wubing and Dong Fangxin roared in a low voice. Their celestial core powers spread in front of them, hoping to resist the incoming planet. Puchi! The planet slammed into them, and the two of them spat out a mouthful of blood. The celestial core power in front of them dissipated, and coupled with the suction force behind them, the two of them were sent flying. The speed of the planet was beyond their imagination. Soon, the two of them were sucked into one of the vortexes around Devour. This scene was naturally seen by Zhuo Wen, who was wrapped in gales nearby. A trace of gloominess immediately appeared in his eyes. The pressure that the infant Devour gave him was too great. Even the master of the divine tomb seemed to be somewhat afraid of this infant Devour. This was just a young Devour. If he grew up, wouldn't his strength be even more terrifying? At this moment, Zhuowen and the Lord of the Divine Tomb were getting closer and closer to the entrance. Zhuowen could even see the scar in front of them. As long as they reached the scar, they would be able to leave this void completely. Suddenly, Devour, who was lying lazily in the middle of the 8 vortexes, slowly narrowed his eyes. Then, he craned his neck and let out a clear roar. Next, Yuan saw several planets coming over from not far away, blocking their way. The Lord of the Divine Tomb coldly snorted and said, "You guys go first. I'll stop these planets." After saying that, the Lord of the Divine Tomb leaped up. As he leaped up, his body constantly expanded, turning into the size of a planet in the blink of an eye. True scripture of obliteration. The Lord of the Divine Tomb fiercely punched out. Instantly, his right fist was surrounded by a powerful force of obliteration. When the fist hit the planet, countless cracks appeared on its surface. Although the Lord of the Divine Tomb could only exert the power of a demigod, which wasn't enough to destroy a planet, the planet inside Devour's body was much weaker than a normal planet like the Heavenly Armor Star. After all, Devour had been devouring the planet's energy for many years, so there wasn't much left. That was why the Lord of the Divine Tomb could resist these planets. However, it wasn't easy for the Lord of the Divine Tomb. While the Lord of the Divine Tomb was blocking the planets, Zhuowen and the others were rushing toward the entrance with irresistible force. However, when Zhuowen and the others were about to reach the entrance, the mocking look in the young Devour's eyes became thicker. Devour opened his mouth and sucked. The 8 vortexes around him immediately merged into a giant vortex that looked like a black hole. A suction force that was many times stronger than before spread out in the entire void. Countless planets scattered around this void began to rotate clockwise, moving toward the giant vortex where Devour was. Their speed was many times faster than before. Seeing the entrance close at hand and the suction force doubling, Yuan could only watch the entrance move away from him. The Lord of the Divine Tomb swung his arms, shaking off the planets that were blocking his way. Then, he came to the place where Zhuowen and the others were. However, the suction force was so terrifying that even the Lord of the Divine Tomb couldn't resist it. The gusts of wind didn't move forward, but moved away from the entrance. "What should we do now?" asked Zhuowen with a frown. The Lord of the Divine Tomb was a little reluctant. He shook his head and said, "I've tried my best. Unfortunately, Devour's suction force is too terrifying." For the time being, the atmosphere became silent. Zhuowen's eyes sparkled. He gritted his teeth, preparing to use the power Cangjie had given him. However, when he was about to take out the Fushi cauldron and used Cangjie's power, a sigh arose around him. This old man is still one step behind. After he finished speaking, Zhuowen and the others felt the world spin around them. Then they disappeared from the void. Devour, who was happily absorbing the planets around, showed a cold gleam in his eyes. He roared and accelerated the absorption of the planets around him. In the dim hall, countless black veins were moving freely. Deep inside the hall, a lonely figure was sitting on a throne. In the center of the hall, the dim candlelight became dimmer. The moment the candlelight dimmed, the space above was distorted. Then, several figures descended. These figures were Zhuowen, the Lord of the Divine Tomb, Shiji, and the First Mountain God. Zhuan looked around. Then, he came to the throne and said respectfully, "Predecessor Tsongjie." The first mountain god nodded to Tsongjie with a calm face. As for the Lord of the Divine Tomb, he shivered. He hurried to the throne and said excitedly, "Master, I finally see you again." Shiji originally had a bewildered expression, but when he heard how Zhuan addressed him, his expression shook, and he followed closely behind the Divine Tomb Master. However, after seeing Tsongjie's appearance, Shiji couldn't help but take a deep breath. At this moment, Tsongjie looked neither like a human nor a ghost. He couldn't associate him with the valiant Tsongjie from before. "Predecessor Tsongjie, what's going on? Didn't you ask me to bring Devour's infant back? Why did you stop me?" Zhuan asked confusedly. Tsongjie shook his head. "It's useless now. Devour's infant body has hatched. Even if you use that power, you can't suppress it. Initially, Devour's infant body hadn't hatched yet. I didn't expect that Yang Yi would destroy it. I'm afraid Yang Yi's purpose was to hatch Devour and kill my hope of getting out of here. Moreover, I already knew Yang Yi's identity. I didn't expect it to be him." Speaking of this, Tsongjie's mouth was filled with bitterness. He had calculated everything, but he had missed Yang Yi. At first, he didn't care much about Yang Yi. However, at the most critical moment, Yang Yi had destroyed all his plans. "Who's Yang?" asked Zhuan. "If I'm not wrong, he should be the son of God Gonggu. He has calculated everything. His purpose is to prevent me from escaping. Another purpose is to take Devour's infant body for himself. Anyway, Devour's infant body is much weaker than the adult Devour. With the power of the God of Heaven, he could subdue Devour," said Tsongjie indifferently. Zhuan's pupils shrank. If Yang Yi was like what Tsongjie said, he was too cunning. In fact, Yang Yi had calculated everything a long time ago. Chapter 1862. Tsongjie's anomaly in a massive underground cave world. The adult Devour's body was lying quietly on top of the karst cave. If one observed carefully, they could see that Devour's body, which was like an empty space, was slowly shrinking. The twinkling stars in his body dimmed, and their number was decreasing. As the stars in Devour's body dimmed, his aura became weaker, as if he could fall at any minute. Below Devour, on a massive stone platform, a petite figure lifted her head, looking at the anomaly in Devour's body. Her eyes were solemn as she sighed and muttered, "I shouldn't have stepped into this muddy water." "Tongwei." Suddenly, a faint voice came from behind the petite figure. Then, the petite figure trembled and turned around abruptly. She saw Yang Yi, who was wearing a black brocade robe, looking at her with a smile on his face. Behind Yang Yi, Sky Worm, who had transformed into a muscular man, grinned at the petite figure in front of him. This petite figure was none other than Yen Tianwei, who had left the khaki-colored planet earlier. Yen Tianwei had the divination holy talisman, so she had foreseen the danger on the khaki-colored planet. That was why she had avoided the disaster caused by Devour. Yen Tianwei gazed at Yang Yi, frowning. She couldn't help but take a few steps back. She looked at Yang Yi vigilantly, asking in a low voice, "Brother Yang Yi, when did you get out?" Yang Yi smiled faintly, "Not long ago." Then Yang Yi flicked his finger, throwing a mass of white light to Yen Tianwei. "This is the sea of consciousness of the Chaos Temple's ancient. Check his memory and find the way to break the immortal godlocking formation." Receiving the mass of white light, Yen Tianwei furrowed her brows. She didn't like the way Yang Yi treated her as his subordinate. However, she was also very clear that Yang Yi was very strong. With her strength, there was no way she could compete with him. "Don't worry. I won't break my promise to you. I'm giving you the revolving thorn holy talisman now." Yang Yi looked at Yen Tianwei indifferently, then pointed with his right finger. Suddenly, a black vortex appeared at the tip of his finger. The black vortex wriggled and finally turned into a black talisman. Receiving the revolving stab Saint Rune, Yen Tianwei's expression softened. He nodded and said, "I will take a look at the method to break the indestructible godlock array. However, I need a quiet place right now." Yang Yi smiled faintly and said, "That's not a problem. Let's go to the space where God Ganj is." It's a separate space that I have isolated with the power of the void. As he spoke, Yan Tianwei waved his sleeve. Immediately, the power of the void swept out from his sleeve. Immediately, a ring-shaped independent void space appeared in front of Yan Tianwei. Yan Tianwei nodded and brought the revolving thorn saint talisman and Gugu's sea of consciousness into the space. Then Yang Yi kept the space in his sleeve. Then, Yang Yi's eyes fell on Devour's closed left eye as he said faintly, "Old Songjie, you think I don't know where you are? The reason why I got into Devour's body earlier was to numb him. I've brought forward the hatching time of Devour's larva. I'm afraid that old man Songjie has already known my identity. Anyway, it's not a big deal. It's time for me to settle the old score." That old man wanted to use the power of the strongest parasite to backfire on Devour. Did he think it was that easy? In the end, he didn't look like a human or a ghost. What a joke. Tiangu grinned and said, "Sir, you're really wise. That old man Songjie's ambition isn't small. However, Devour is one of the strongest races in the starry sky. How could an aboriginal backfire on him just like that? Moreover, since Sir has hatched Devour's larva, it should be easy to tame it." Yang Yi shook his head and said, "It's not that simple. Even though it's just hatched, it's not easy to tame it. Moreover, when it starts to absorb the energy of Devour, it will become stronger. At that time, it won't be easy to tame it." Tiangu was a little puzzled. Then, why did Sir let the larva absorb the energy of Devour? Isn't it disadvantageous to tame Devour? Yang Yi said indifferently, "Because the larva has swallowed the Jade Godman's bird-shaped magic tool. That thing's attack power is really terrifying. However, that's not the most important feature of this magic tool. The most important feature of this magic tool is that it can control the creature it worships to a certain extent. I used the god Lord Do Hua as a sacrifice to Devour's larva. Moreover, I've brought forward the hatching time of Devour to control it. However, it's not easy to control a powerful creature like Devour. Even with the help of the Jade Godman's bird-shaped magic tool, I'm afraid I can only affect Devour's larva a little. I can't really control it." Then, Yang Yi looked at Devour's left eye and said, "Perhaps you don't know that the power of the strongest parasite in Songjie's body comes from Devour. By letting Devour hatch and absorb Devour's energy, I'm actually suppressing that old man's power." Listening to Yang Yi's explanation, Tiangu's eyes turned cold. His respect for Yang increased. However, Yang Yi was mysterious and unfathomable. Moreover, he was powerful. His scheming was enough to make Tian Chong willingly submit to him. At the same time, Heavenly Insect recalled that time. Although Heavenly God Gongu had called Yang Yi his son, Heavenly Insect was keenly aware that his master, Gongu, actually held a respectful attitude toward this so-called son. This kind of respectful attitude wasn't like a father facing his own child. It was more like a subordinate facing a superior. That was why Tiangu obeyed Yang Yi's orders. He didn't even dare to disobey. "You go and dig out Devour's left eye. Hangzhe, Zhuo and the others should be in there," said Yang Yi indifferently. Tiangu's pupils shrank. He was a little scared. "Sir, it's an adult Devour. Do you think it will wake him up if I dig out his eye?" "Don't worry. The adult Devour is already an arrow at the end of its flight. Moreover, the infant Devour has been born. Logically speaking, it should be on the verge of death. Moreover, the adult Devour's eyes have been blinded since we entered this place. You'll be fine even if you dig out its left eye. Anyway, we need to be careful of Songjie. He's been in Devour's body for a long time. I don't know how far he has fused with the strongest parasite," said Yang Yi in a low voice. Tiangu nodded. Then, the black mist on his body burst out. Tiangu dashed out, revealing his true form. His 12 arms looked ferocious and intimidating. Although Tiangu's body was big enough, he was still small compared to Devour's adult body. He was just as big as Devour's eyes. Boom! Tiangu's attack fell on Devour's left eye. Then, people in the hall immediately felt the hall shake violently. "Someone is attacking the outside of the hall," said the master of the divine tomb. "It's Tiangu." Songjie's eyes were cold and gloomy. Seems like he wants to dig out the left eye of this hall. But it's not that easy. Then, countless black veins around the hall became crazy. Then, the bulges around the hall burst. From the bursting bulges, people with cold eyes walked out. They all had a strange beast mark on their glabella, which was similar to Kong Wen and the black and white giant. However, the strange beast mark on their glabella was dark purple. Their auras could be compared to the black and white giant. Altogether, 12 people walked out of the hall. They came to the throne, bowed their heads respectfully, and said in a low voice, "Master, destroy the intruders," said Songjia indifferently. The 12 people nodded slightly. Then they rushed out and left the hall. Zhuan looked at the 12 people leaving and frowned slightly. Book Immortal Kong Wen, whom he had met before, had mentioned Master, and these people also called Songjia Master. It seemed that the real master of the strange beast mark on their glabella was Songjia in front of him. They all fell in the war with the god of heaven 10,000 years ago. Later, when I was sealed here by the strongest parasite, I tried many methods. Finally, I found a way to let other parasites enter the corpses and let them continue to live, explained Songjia with a faint smile. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. Although they have been resurrected, they are no different from the living dead, right? They are no longer what they used to be, but living dead without souls. Speaking of this, the atmosphere in the hall became tense. However, Songjia didn't care. He smiled and said, "Little guy, maybe you don't know that this parasite does have the risk of being possessed. However, once you can control this parasite, you can gain a lot of power." At that time, I had no choice. If I hadn't fallen into the deep underground and been trapped here, I wouldn't have been possessed by Devour's strongest parasite. Anyway, I've been living like this for 10,000 years, and I've gained tremendous power. Zhuan looked at Songjia deeply and said in a low voice, "Didn't you say that you don't have much time left? Since Devour has hatched in advance, how can we help you now?" Chapter 1863. Heaven devouring eye. Seeing the candlelight that was about to go out, Zhuowen's pupils involuntarily shrank, and a bad feeling rose in his heart. But soon he regained his composure, and said to Songjia with a smile, "Senior, congratulations for successfully suppressing the strongest parasite. But Yang Yi and Tiangu are both very powerful, and it's possible that the God of War Spear is also in Yang Yi's hands. Once the God of War Spear escapes, I'm afraid the situation will become extremely troublesome. Although the 12 people you sent out are strong, I'm afraid it's not enough to deal with Yang Yi and Tiangu. Why don't you let us go out and help?" The Master of the Divine Tomb and Shiji nodded in agreement. The Master of the Divine Tomb said respectfully, "Master, Yun is right. Yang Yi and Tiangu are both very powerful. Those 12 people are indeed not enough." On the other hand, the first mountain god frowned slightly. He had once entered the palace just like Zhuowen. Now, like Zhuowen, he also found that the current Songjia was very different from the previous Songjia. Both his tone and attitude were completely different from before. Of course, with his observation, he naturally noticed that the floating candlelight in the center of the hall had reached the end of its road, and he secretly became vigilant. It was the first time that the Master of the Divine Tomb and Shiji had entered this place. Although they also noticed the candlelight in the hall, they did not care too much about it, so they did not have the same doubts as Zhuowen and the first mountain god. It's good that you have this intention, but your strength is still not enough, especially Shiji. His cultivation has fallen from the peak of the true immortal realm to the middle of the true immortal realm. Although Fushi has Chao Yu's demigod body and can barely exert demigod power, the price is too great and Zhuowen's cultivation is not enough. If you really want to help me, I have a way to temporarily increase your strength. If your strength increases, it will be of great help to me, Songjia said with a smile. The Master of the Divine Tomb looked respectful and said in a deep voice, "Master, what is it?" Songjia smiled and waved his right hand. Suddenly, 8 black bulges appeared behind him. The black bulges pulsed gently, as if they were hearts. Then, the bulges exploded one after another, and 8 black shadows rushed out. The 8 shadows surrounded Songjia and were about the size of a finger. Looking carefully, they were very similar to the mark between Songjia's eyebrows. Juan narrowed his eyes. These 8 shadows were exactly the same as the exotic beast that had crawled out from Zhanbai's forehead. It was just that the exotic beast back then was much larger than these newly born parasites. This is a parasite larva. It's a species that I've refined over the years. As long as this parasite larva enters your body, your strength will multiply. Shiji, you will be able to return to the pinnacle of the true immortal stage. As for Fushi, you will be able to completely consolidate your power as a demigod. As for Zhuowen, you will be able to advance to the true immortal stage. As for you, the first mountain god, you will also obtain the power of a demigod, Songjia said with a faint smile. Shiji narrowed his eyes and asked in a deep voice, "Is this thing safe? Once it's implanted between my eyebrows, won't it destroy my sea of consciousness?" Songjia chuckled and said, "Don't worry. This is a larva that I've specially refined. It's not like those failed parasites that enter corpses. It will only increase your strength unilaterally. It will have absolutely no effect on your sea of consciousness and spiritual intelligence." Although Shiji had some doubts in his heart, he just nodded and did not raise any objections due to his trust in Songjia. As for the master of the tomb god, he remained silent and did not speak. "The 8 of you should relax and don't resist. Only in this way, the larva will successfully enter your body and increase your strength." With that, Songjia waved his sleeve. The 8 larvae roared and rushed toward the master of the tomb god, Shiji and Shun. "Everyone step back. This is not Senior Songjia. The real Senior Songjia has probably been completely possessed by the strongest parasite." Zhuan suddenly transmitted his voice to everyone. Then, he took a step forward and immediately threw out the mysterious eyeball that was still playing dead in his collar. The black lightning produced by the mysterious eyeball was extremely effective against the parasite. Therefore, he threw the mysterious eyeball out immediately. This. The mysterious eyeball hissed unhappily. However, it soon noticed the 8 parasitic larvae in front of it, and a greedy look appeared in its eyes. The eyeball blinked and immediately shot out 8 black lightning bolts toward the 8 parasitic larvae. When the 8 black lightning bolts covered the 8 parasitic larvae, the 8 parasitic larvae made a strange sizzling sound and then collapsed. Then the 8 lightning bolts returned to the mysterious eyeball. Songjia's pupils shrank. He stared at the mysterious eyeball in front of him with a trace of uncertainty. He said in a low voice, "The heaven-devouring eye? Wasn't it taken from Devour's body and refined by God Gongo? Why is it in your body?" Zhuowen's eyes flickered, but his heart skipped a beat. It seemed that the strongest parasite of the mysterious eyeball knew something about its origins. However, Zhuowen would not be so stupid as to reveal how he obtained the mysterious eyeball. The master of the tomb of the god of sin and Shiji looked extremely gloomy. They also realized that Songjia was really possessed by the strongest parasite, as Zhuowen said. After all, the 8 larvae just now gave them a strange sense of crisis. If they really let the larvae enter their glabella, as Songjia said, they would be in real danger. "Master!" Fushi sighed softly. "We have to leave this place as soon as possible." Zhuan took out the blood-splashing 5 steps and looked at Songjia, who was sitting on the throne in front of him with a complicated expression. The memory of Songjia passing on the bloody 5 steps to him was still vivid in his mind. Not long after, Songjia's mind was not clear, and he was completely controlled by the strongest parasite. "This hall is under my control. Without my permission, don't even think about going anywhere. It just so happens that you've also sent the heaven-devouring eye over. I'll devour it as well. Perhaps it can even increase my strength." Ha! On the throne, Songjia looked up to the sky and laughed. His eyes were full of ridicule. Then the whole hall began to shake. The dense black veins on the surface of the hall rushed out and gathered toward Zhuowen from all directions. A terrifying momentum as vast as Mount Tai filled the whole hall. The mysterious eyeball suddenly buzzed and its pupils shrank. Suddenly, black lightning rushed out from the center of its pupils. As soon as the black lightning appeared, it scattered and turned into dense black electric wires. These dense black electric wires radiated out. The black veins in front of them exploded into masses of black blood. However, the number of black veins was extremely terrifying. They were densely packed and came from all directions. The mysterious eyeball only defended the black veins in one direction. The black veins in the other three directions rushed toward Zhuan and the master of the tomb god. The master of the tomb god shouted angrily. He spread his arms and used the shattering scripture. He was responsible for the black veins on the left. The first mountain god stood behind to resist the black veins behind him. Zhuan, Shiji, and the 4 genuine immortal Dao soldiers were on the right, barely resisting the black veins. Zhuan slowly pulled out the iron sword from the blood splatter 5 steps. Suddenly, a fierce aura filled the scabbard. When Zhuan pulled out the first sword, the tip of the iron sword emitted a blazing sword light. This sword light lit up the whole hall. As soon as the sword was pulled out, the sword light flashed. Countless black veins on the right instantly collapsed. Its power was even comparable to the black lightning at the mysterious eyeball. Shiji was dumbfounded. He stared at the scabbard in Zhuowen's hand and could not help but exclaim, "Blood splatter 5 steps?" Zhanbai's substandard god weapon blood splatter 5 steps. Now is not the time to be surprised. Let's leave this place quickly. Zhuowen's eyes were serious. The yellow springs water droplets in his body rushed out and formed a constantly rotating gate of reincarnation in the air. The gate of reincarnation suddenly opened. Zhuowen said to Shiji and the 4 genuine immortal Dao soldiers, "You guys go in quickly. This gate of reincarnation has a teleportation array that can lead to the outside world." Shiji and the 4 genuine immortal Dao soldiers looked at each other, then directly rushed into the gate of reincarnation. First mountain god and senior Fuxi, you guys go in as well. Zhuowen suddenly swung out the second sword. A crescent-shaped sword light shot out. The moment this sword light shot out, it instantly formed thousands of sword lights. They were like stars in the night sky, constantly flashing. The black veins in front of the first mountain god all collapsed. The first mountain god took a deep look at Zhuowen, then nodded and entered the gate of reincarnation as well. On the other side, the Lord of the Divine Tomb, Fuxi, let out a furious roar. The coffin embedded in the forehead of the stone statue directly separated. The huge stone statue directly exploded. The terrifying explosion immediately stopped the black veins in front of it. Fuxi's coffin also took advantage of this opening to fly out and enter the gate of reincarnation. "Let's go!" At this moment, Zhuowen swung out the third sword. At this moment, in the air above Zhuowen's head, an extremely huge illusory sword appeared. This illusory sword was like a tombstone, floating above his head. Zhuowen's face was pale and bloodless. A mouthful of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. The blood splatter 5 steps was a subgod weapon. Every time he pulled out the sword, the burden on Zhuowen was extremely heavy. The first sword injured Zhuowen's body. The second sword injured him to a rather serious extent. The third sword even made Zhuowen feel like his body was about to collapse. It was unbearable. However, the power of the third sword was indeed terrifying. The illusory sword floated around Zhuowen like a real tombstone, protecting Zhuowen. The surrounding black veins rushed over, but they were blocked by the illusory sword. At this moment, the mysterious eyeball also rushed over and went back into Zhuowen's collar. However, the aura of the mysterious eyeball was a little chaotic. It was obvious that it was not easy for it to block the black veins. "Let's go!" Zhuowen took a step forward and stepped into the gate of reincarnation. Chapter 1864. The awakening of the Devour the Dim Light was so fast that it arrived behind Zhuowen in an instant. It was so fast that Zhuowen did not even have time to react. At this moment, Zhuowen was trembling all over and sweating profusely. His heart was beating wildly and he was extremely nervous. An ominous premonition filled his mind. There was no doubt that the dim light gave him a strong sense of crisis. He even had no doubt that if the dim light fell on the back of his head, he would definitely die. However, the speed of the dim light was too fast, almost exceeding Zhuowen's reaction speed. Zhuowen's thoughts spun 1,000 times in an instant, and the dim light was already very close. In the next moment, it would pierce through the back of his head and kill him. Suddenly, the dim light that was about to penetrate the back of Zhuowen's head suddenly stopped a few inches away from the back of Zhuowen's head. It was as if time had stopped. Zhuowen naturally found that the dim light behind him had stopped abruptly. His eyes were filled with astonishment. "Little guy, hurry up and leave here." The devourer of the larvae was finally destroyed by Yang Yi. "I have reached my limit and am powerless to reverse the situation. Hurry up and leave." A vicissitude voice slowly sounded from behind. Zhuan turned his head and saw Cangjie sitting on the throne behind him. Cangjie's face was full of bitterness. At this moment, Cangjie's face was full of pain. The countless black veins that pierced into his body were surging crazily, as if they were absorbing Cangjie's essence and blood. Zhuan took a deep look at Cangjie. He sighed slightly and jumped into the gate of reincarnation. The gate of reincarnation closed and then collapsed into nothingness. The candlelight in the center of the hall was finally extinguished. Cangjie groaned in pain and slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were scarlet and he said coldly, "I didn't expect that it would backfire on me and let that little guy run away. But the last trace of Cangjie's consciousness has been completely devoured by me. In the future, this guy will not hinder me." Bang, bang, bang. All of a sudden, the hall shook violently again. Cangjie slowly lifted his head, his eyes darkening as he muttered, "What a tough guy. This sky worm isn't weak at all. However, it's just wishful thinking if he wants to dig out Devour's left eye. I've been dormant in Devour's body for so many years. Finally, I've waited until Devour's weakest moment. It's the time for me to turn the situation around. How could I let you destroy my plan?" Then the entire hall collapsed. More black veins stretched out from the walls around the hall. There were so many black veins that they almost looked like a black sea. There was no end sea of black sea of them. Those black veins of black veins. Of the dark veins of the black veins. Cangjie grunted coldly and slapped with his right hand, causing the enormous and long black-colored meridian to shoot out explosively like an arrow that had left the bow and abruptly bore into the depths behind him. The black veins were so long that they went through Devour's eyeball directly into his brain. At this moment, Devour was so weak that he was almost dying. The black veins didn't encounter much resistance when they entered his brain. They entered his brain smoothly. "Ha! What the strongest race in the universe. I've been dormant in your body for a long time. Finally, I can control you. Ha!" Cangjie laughed wildly in the eyeball. At this moment, outside the left eye, 12 shadows were moving fast on the surface of Skyworm. They cooperated well, and soon, they had entangled Skyworm. Skyworm squinted and sneered. "You're just a lowly parasite. You want to stop me? You're courting death." With that, Tiangu's body suddenly swelled as the black fog spread. Countless bone spikes emerged from its huge, black body. They moved extremely quickly, piercing through the 12 figures that constantly flashed around Tiangu in an instant. Swoosh. However, the 12 shadows didn't seem to feel any pain. The moment the bone thorns pierced through them, they continued to attack Skyworm. Skyworm sneered, and a terrifying vibration came from his bone spikes. Then, the 12 figures that had been pierced exploded into dust. After the 12 shadows exploded into powder, a shadow flew out from the glabella of each of the 12 shadows. They were the parasites of the exotic beasts. The 12 parasites roared furiously and continued to charge at Tianzong. If it were any other person, they would definitely be at a loss at this juncture. However, Tianzong merely sneered as another 12 bone spurs grew from his body. The 12 bone spikes pierced into the bodies of the 12 parasites with extreme precision, instantly shattering them into countless drops of black blood. These disgusting things are really hard to deal with. Skyworm's bone thorns slowly retracted into his body. His eyes were cold and gloomy. These are the parasites in Devour's body. Devour's massive body naturally has all kinds of parasites. If I'm not wrong, Cangjie should be under the control of the strongest parasites. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to control these parasitic corpses. I wonder if the parasites have completely taken over Cangjie's body, said Yang Yi with a faint smile. Skyworm nodded. He stomped his right foot and dashed toward Yang Yi's left eye. He planned to follow Yang Yi's order and dig out Devour's left eye. Swoosh! The moment Skyworm was about to reach Devour's left eye opened. Layers of circular pupils revealed a strange gleam. At the same time, a terrifying aura fell on Skyworm. Skyworm's body froze. Then, black mist burst out from his body as if countless bombs were exploding in his body. He retreated step by step, spitting out black blood. His face was pale. Yang Yi's pupils shrank. He waved his sleeve, and instantly, the void power turned into a giant hand, grabbing the heavenly insect. Then he stomped his right foot, gathering the void power under his feet as he stepped back, moving away from Devour, who had opened his left eye all of a sudden. At this moment, Devour's left eye was fully opened. His dull pupils now radiated a strange black light, coldly gazing at Yang Yi and Skyworm. Sir, Devour. Has he woken up? Skyworm was scared out of his wits. Yang Yi squinted, gazing at Devour's left eye. He pondered for a while and then sneered. Devour has hatched a baby. He will become weaker and weaker. Eventually, the baby will devour him, becoming the nourishment for the baby to grow. It can be said that Devour with a baby is doomed to die. At least, before the baby swallows all the energy in his body, he won't wake up. Skyworm's entire body was trembling. His lips trembled as he asked, Master, what is going on now? Yang Yi's eyes sparkled as he said coldly, Devour, Master. You're smarter than I thought. I didn't expect that you could guess Devour, Master. Devour's left eye gazed at Yang Yi, his cold voice echoing. Yang Yi's eyes were cold as he said, I wonder if I should call you Tsongjie or Parasite? Devour's left eye looked at Yang Yi, smiling evilly. You can call me Tsongjie or Parasite. No matter what, you two are going to die. That baby in Devour's body has a big appetite. It's still swallowing the stars in Devour's body. I guess you've done something to it, haven't you? Anyway, no matter what you've done from now on, that baby Devour won't get any energy from the adult Devour. Then, Devour roared. His massive body began to wiggle. Then, the wiggling surface of his body exploded, and a giant beast that was several thousand meters tall was blown away. It was in a sorry state. This 1,000-meter-tall beast looked exactly the same as Devour. It also had 12 horns, but it was much smaller than the adult Devour. Moreover, it looked much younger than the adult Devour. The baby Devour looked confused. It looked at the adult Devour in front of it, hissing as it wanted to enter the adult Devour's body one more time. However, when the baby Devour approached the adult Devour swung its sharp claws, hitting the baby Devour. The baby Devour didn't have time to react. It was blown away, hitting the rock wall behind the cave. Seems like you can only use a part of the adult Devour's power. Yang Yi sneered as he looked at the baby Devour, who was struggling to get up from the rock wall with confused eyes. Even if it's only a part of my power, it's enough to kill you. Tsongjie sneered, then controlled Devour's body, storming toward Yang Yi's eyes shrank. He stomped his right foot, shattering the void under his feet. Then he brought Skyworm into the void. Little guy, follow me. Yang Yi smiled, waving at the baby Devour as the void shattered not far from him. Devour stared at Yang Yi confusedly. He didn't know why, but he felt a sense of intimacy from this human, as if this human was his closest relative. Devour couldn't bear any malice towards Yang Yi. Devour hissed, then jumped into the void where Yang Yi was. Immediately, the void exploded. Yang Yi controlled the void power, dashing toward the exit. His speed was so fast that he almost turned into an illusory shadow. You can't run away. Tsongjie roared. The adult Devour's giant left eye gazed at Yang Yi, then dashed up into the sky. Boom! In just a blink of an eye, Devour had broken through the ceiling of the massive cave. The long horn on its head thrust out, creating a big hole in the ceiling. Countless rocks fell down. Devour's power was too intimidating. With just one move, the scorching hot lava in the entire underground cave had turned into a giant fire dragon, rolling up and creating a massive lava wave. Chapter 1865. Shuddering Devour was too powerful. Moreover, the way he broke through the ground was extremely rough, as if he was going on a rampage. For a moment, the entire heavenly armor star shook violently. The cracks on the heavenly armor star, which was already in ruins, became denser and denser. It was as if the entire heavenly armor star was about to shatter. On a broken mountain peak, a broken sword was stuck in the ground. Ji Chenyan was trying her best to pull it out with her immortal energy. However, the surface of the broken sword was covered with a powerful seal. Helpless, Ji Chenyan could only use his immortal elemental energy to weaken the powerful restrictive light on the surface of the broken sword with brute force. Almost done. Ji Chenyan's beautiful eyes were filled with excitement. Suddenly, the entire ground began to tremble. Then, Ji Chenyan's entire being became confused. The shaking became more and more violent. Countless huge gullies appeared on the ground as if it was the end of the world. What's going on? Ji Chenyan hurriedly leaped into the air. Staring at the countless cracks on the ground, she couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. In the huge black lake, countless black shadows flashed. From time to time, some strange human figures would jump out of the water, stirring up countless black splashes. Suddenly, at the edge of the black lake, a huge palace emerged from the water. The door of the main hall slowly opened, and a rather wretched figure walked out of the main hall. The power of the revolving stab holy talisman is really strong. If I hadn't broken through to the early sky immortal realm in the central divine palace, it wouldn't have been so easy to get rid of the power of the revolving stab holy talisman. The man was tall and slender, with a handsome face. He was the divine child, Yuan Hongwen. Ever since he was trapped in the central palace by Yang Yi and Heavenly Insect and thrown to the bottom of the Black Lake, Yuan Hongwen had been cultivating like a madman. Every time he was attacked by those strange human figures at the bottom of the lake, Yuan Hongwen, who was jolted by the palace door, was very sullen. Fortunately, after those strange humanoid figures attacked the central palace for a long time, they realized that they could not break through the palace at all. They lost interest in the palace, and Yuan Hongwen successfully broke through to become a celestial immortal under the pressure. After that, Yuan Hongwen used his own strength to erase the power of the spiral thorn saint talisman that Yang Yi had placed outside the temple door. Then, he brought the temple up to the shore of the Black Lake with difficulty. I've already broken through to the early stage of the Sky Immortal Realm. That Zhuoan might still be in the late stage of the Earth Immortal Realm, or even the peak of the Earth Immortal Realm. However, there's a huge gap between the Sky Immortal Realm and the Earth Immortal Realm. If I meet Zhuoan again, I'll definitely be able to defeat him. After putting away the central divine palace, Yuan Hongwen's eyes were still filled with excitement. He was still brooding over the 2 defeats he had suffered at the hands of Zhuoan. Rumble. Suddenly, the entire ground began to tremble violently. Countless cracks appeared on the ground, and even the Black Lake behind Yuan Hongwen began to churn with huge black waves. Yuan Hongwen staggered and almost fell to the ground. His eyes were filled with shock as he looked at the Black Lake churning with terrifying waves. His body trembled and his face turned pale. Did something happen underground? Yuan Hongwen furrowed his brows and murmured in a low voice. Not only Yuan Hongwen and Ji Chenyan, but all the other Chaos War gods on the surface of the heavenly armor star were also shocked. They all flew to the sky above the heavenly armor star, not daring to linger on the surface of the heavenly armor star. Swoosh! Suddenly, a figure burst out from the Black Lake. Yuan Hongwen looked over and his pupils shrank. He clenched his fists because the person who came out of the Black Lake was none other than Yang Yi. Although Yuan Hongwen hated Yang Yi very much, he knew that Yang Yi's strength was terrifying. Therefore, he retreated without hesitation until he was as far away from the Black Lake as possible. Of course, Yang Yi didn't care about Yuan Hongwen. After jumping out of the Black Lake with the sky worm and devour larva, he didn't slow down. He continued to soar up into the sky, moving away from the heavenly armor star. Yang Yi's strange behavior also caused Yuan Hongwen to be puzzled. He muttered in a low voice, Is there something underground chasing after Yang Yi? Not long after Yuan Hongwen said that, the heavenly armor star shook even more violently. Then, countless waves surged from the Black Lake. Then, the ground around the Black Lake within 100 million zhang radius was overturned. A giant beast, so huge that they couldn't see the end of it, stormed out from the ground. This giant beast was too huge. Its body was 1/10 of the size of the heavenly armor star. Moreover, when it jumped out of the ground and soared into the starry sky, its body was still growing. When the giant beast got out of the heavenly armor star's range, it hovered in the starry sky billions of kilometers away from the heavenly armor star. Yuan Hongwen had already hidden in the central palace when the giant beast broke out of the ground. After all, the giant beast was too huge. Its body alone had already covered the place where he was just now. Therefore, Yuan Hongwen had no choice but to enter the central palace bitterly. As for Ji Chunyan and the others, they were far away from the Black Lake. Therefore, when the giant beast flew out of the heavenly armor star, they weren't affected too much. At this moment, 1/10 of the heavenly armor star's surface had become a bottomless abyss. If one looked from afar, one could see that the cracked heavenly armor star looked as if it had been bitten by a giant beast. An extremely ugly gap had appeared. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Many figures gathered at the edge of the huge abyss. Ji Chunyan was among them. They stared at the huge hole in the abyss. Their minds were shaken and their bodies were trembling. Swoosh. A palace flew down from the abyss and stopped not far from Ji Chunyan and the others. Then, the palace door opened and Yuan Hongwen walked out in a sorry state. Brother Yuan, what happened down there? You should be around here, right? Ji Chunyan couldn't help but ask. Yuan Hongwen's mouth was full of bitterness. Actually, I don't know. Those who can go deep underground are at least at the Sky Immortal realm. The God Lord didn't let me go with him. What about Zhuowen? I remember that Zhuowen also went to your side at that time, right? Ji Chunyan asked. Yuan Hongwen sighed. Zhuowen did come to my place. However, he went deep underground. I don't know how he is now. He went in? Does he want to die? My forefather told me that it's extremely dangerous to go deep underground. Those below the Sky Immortal realm must die. Even Sky Immortal realm experts have the risk of dying. Why did Zhuowen go in? Ji Chunyan didn't understand. Yuan Hongwen shook his head helplessly. Then he looked up at the sky. Above the heavenly armor star, the adult devourer's enormous body covered the sky like a black cloud. The entire heavenly armor star was shrouded in darkness as if it was night. Now, I'm more curious about what that thing is. It came out from the underground of the heavenly armor star. It's too terrifying. Looking at the colossal creature, Yuan Hongwen couldn't help but tremble. He felt that he was like an insignificant ant in front of such a terrifying beast that could be squashed to death at any time. The rest of the people were also trembling. This huge beast was too terrifying. They couldn't even muster up the will to resist. They couldn't help but feel a sense of worship towards this huge beast. This was the innate fear of those who were inferior to those who were superior. What about my forefather and the others? Didn't they come out from the underground? Ji Chunyan seemed to recall something and couldn't help but ask Yuan Hongwen. Yuan Hongwen looked at Ji Chunyan in silence. The bitterness at the corner of his mouth became thicker. He was cursing inwardly. He wanted to ask someone else this question. Ji Chunyan was asking the wrong person. Looking at Yuan Hongwen's expression, Ji Chunyan knew that he didn't know either. She couldn't help but feel disappointed. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, a terrifying white pillar burst out from the bottom of the abyss of the heavenly armor star. The white pillar was so huge that it contained an extremely dense amount of immortal qi. The immortal qi pillar turned into 10 thick white pillars that shot up from the inside of the heavenly armor star. They swept into the heavenly armor continent from 10 different directions. This is, Yuan Hongwen, Ji Chunyan, and the others all noticed the 10 white pillars. They realized that the 10 white pillars were constantly wriggling and eventually turned into 10 white staircases that led directly to the interior of the heavenly armor continent. Has the passage between the heavenly armor continent and the heavenly armor star been opened? Yuan Hongwen muttered softly. At this moment, above the heavenly armor continent, 6 huge white vortexes appeared in the sky above the central continent. A white vortex also appeared in the sky above the eastern land, western region, southern barbarian, and northern continent. Many warriors on the heavenly armor continent saw the true appearance of the heavenly armor star through the white vortexes. When they saw the 1/10 crack on the heavenly armor star, they all took in a breath of cold air. This crack was so big that it wasn't smaller than the entire heavenly armor continent. What kind of power could create such a huge crack? All of a sudden, someone noticed that in the starry sky not far from the heavenly armor star, there was a giant beast that was as big as the heavenly armor star. It was flying through the starry sky at an extremely fast speed. In front of this gigantic beast, a young man wearing a devil mask was constantly flashing. Under the man's feet, there was a 10-meter wide disc, which had many twinkling starlight on its surface. Turns out you have an astrolabe. However, the astrolabe's speed isn't as fast as Devour. Chapter 1866. Backlash, Heaven Insect. Yang Yi's eyes were gloomy as he waved his sleeve. Instantly, the muscular man standing next to the astrolabe put on a stern face. He stamped his foot, and a terrifying black mist spread out, instantly revealing his million-zhang-long body. Although Heaven Insect's body was enormous, and his million-zhang-long body was already intimidating for ordinary warriors, he was still like an ant in front of Devour's body, which was almost as big as the heavenly armor star. Boom! Devour's left eye showed disdain. His right hand swept across the sky, and endless gusts of wind howled. Terrifying sonic booms were heard in the surrounding starry sky. Then, a massive black crack appeared. This crack seemed to stretch for millions of zhangs across the starry sky, as if a massive saber was slashing the starry sky. Heaven Insect's eyes were solemn. He growled and his 12 arms shot out. Then, his body began to squirm, giving birth to terrifying black bone spikes. Countless black bone spikes emerged and gathered in the starry sky, forming a million-zhang-long black bone spike. At the same time, Heaven Insect's 12 arms twisted and merged, forming a sky-covering giant hand. This sky-covering giant hand grabbed the massive bone spike as if it was holding a black bone spike spear. Then, it swept the bone spike out, creating endless black gusts of wind. Boom! 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 The bone spike and Devour's right claw collided. Instantly, invisible shockwaves spread out in all directions. The massive shockwaves turned the starry sky hundreds of millions of kilometers around into a vacuum without any signs of life. The countless cracks in the surroundings made many warriors shudder in fear. They didn't doubt that even a true immortal would die instantly if he fell into the shattered starry sky. When the shockwaves of their battles spread out, the black mist on Heaven Insect's body continued to erupt. He retreated continuously, his face pale, and his breathing rapid. Adult Devour's body swayed. He took half a step backward, his cold eyes gazing at Sky Worm. Songjie can only control a small part of Devour's strength. He should be able to display the strength of a peak demigod. However, when Songjie fully adapts to Devour's body, even if he can only control a small part of Devour's strength, he will still be able to display the strength of an early heavenly god. I have to stop it as soon as possible. Yang Yi squinted, coldly gazing at Devour not far from him. It was the first time he showed a stern face. After saying that, Yang Yi waved his sleeve and immediately released the space that had isolated Ganj. Ganj was still sealed in the immortal god sealing formation. White chains shot out and bound Ganj. Yen Tianwei, on the other hand, was squatting in front of the indestructible godlock formation. Occasionally, he would extend his right hand and point at the void, as if he was trying to figure out the flaws and weaknesses of the godlock formation. Yang Yi glanced at Yen Tianwei, then at Ganj. He found that the energy of the white chains binding Ganj was much weaker than before. It seemed that Yen Tianwei had put a lot of effort into the immortal godlock formation. At least, the current immortal godlock formation was much weaker than before. Tianwei, how long will it take to break it completely? Yang Yi asked with a frown. I still need some time. Yen Tianwei replied without turning his head. Bang, bang, bang. Yang Yi turned to look at Sky Worm and Devour, who were fighting not far away. He found that Sky Worm was completely suppressed and was being beaten. If it weren't for Sky Worm's freakishly strong self-healing ability, he would have been killed by Devour. Of course, if Devour was at his peak, he could have killed Sky Worm with one move. However, Devour was too weak now, and he was on the verge of death. Moreover, Songjie couldn't fully control Devour, so he could only display the strength of a peak demigod. Even so, Devour was still terrifyingly strong. It seems that I have to seal Devour completely. I can't let Songjie continue to control Devour. Otherwise, it will be troublesome. Then, Yang Yi waved his sleeve, summoning the infant Devour. Little guy, do you want to get more powerful energy? Go and deal with him. He has the energy you like. If you absorb him, your growth will be faster, and you will grow up, Yang Yi said, pointing at Devour in front of him. The infant Devour rolled his eyes, looking at Yang. Then, he gazed at the adult Devour in front of him. Devour did have the energy it craved. Back then, it didn't like being kicked out of Devour's body. Although the infant Devour was the offspring of the adult Devour, the Devour clan didn't have the concept of bloodline. When the Devour gave birth to the next generation, the new Devour would swallow the adult Devour and inherit all of Devour's energy. That way, the new Devour would surpass the old Devour in the future. That was why the infant Devour was so cold to the adult Devour. On the contrary, he had a strange feeling of intimacy with Yang Yi. The infant Devour roared. His hind feet stomped on the void, moving as fast as a shuttle, fighting against the adult Devour together with the heaven insect. Moreover, as the infant Devour knew the adult Devour well, he could barely resist the adult Devour together with the heaven insect. While the three giant beasts were fighting in the starry sky, countless warriors on the heavenly armor star and the heavenly armor continent were suffering. Although the three giant beasts were fighting in the starry sky, they weren't far from the heavenly armor star and the heavenly armor continent. The shock waves of the battle spread out like earth-shaking waves, shaking the heavenly armor star and the heavenly armor continent hard. Yang Yi quietly watched the battle between the three giant beasts. His right foot stomped on the void under his feet, and he disappeared silently. When he reappeared, he was standing in front of Devour's left eye. Die! Songjie, who was in his left eye, coldly stared at Yang Yi and gently uttered these words. His left eye emitted a strange invisible fluctuation, which turned into a terrifying shockwave and instantly covered Yang Yi's whole body and spread into it. Yang Yi's right hand turned into a claw, grabbing it. Instantly, the void in front of him twisted, and the powerful shockwaves were all diverted from their tracks. Songjie, the adult Devour isn't that easy to control, Yang Yi said indifferently. His left hand reached forward and patted Devour's left eye. A black vortex appeared on the surface of Devour's left eye. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Yang Yi jumped into the black vortex. Inside the world of the left eye, Songjie grimaced, gazing at Yang Yi in front of him. Yang Yi indifferently glanced at the massive black veins on Songjie's back, which rushed to Devour's head. Turns out you're using this to control Devour's brain. No wonder why you're not good at it. Then, Yang Yi stomped on the ground, dashing toward Songjie in just a blink of an eye. Songjie's eyes were cold. His right foot stomped on the ground and the ground cracked. Countless black veins jumped up, blocking all of Yang Yi's escape routes and approaching him. I'm sorry. I'm not strong, but I'm sure you can't compare to me in terms of speed. Yang Yi's eyes were mocking. His right foot stomped on the air, and the power of the void revolved around him. Then he disappeared from his spot, and the black veins around him missed him. Songjie had a bad feeling. He turned around and saw that Yang Yi had appeared on the massive veins behind him. Break! Yang Yi's right hand gently patted on the black veins. The void around the veins shattered, and the veins were directly broken by the power of the void. Black blood gushed out, congregating into a terrifying black rain in this space. The moment the black veins were cut off, the adult Devourer stopped fighting in the starry sky. The baby Devourer looked excited. He immediately jumped into the adult Devourer's body, using the same trick to absorb the energy in the adult devourer's body. In his left eye, Songjie's eyes were red. He gazed at Yang Yi indignantly and said coldly, "Do you think you can stop me by cutting off the connection with Devour? I've been a parasite in Devour's body for a long time. From the moment I got my consciousness, I've been thinking about how to devour my master. I've been preparing for this day for a long time. You can't stop me." Songjie's voice was low. Then, his entire body began to wiggle. Suddenly, countless black veins emerged from his body. At the same time, Songjie didn't look like a human anymore. At this moment, his body was covered with black lumps, which looked extremely disgusting. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At the same time, countless shadows dashed out of this space. They were all parasites in Devour's body. These parasites had different shapes and sizes. Instantly, they filled the entire space. Yang Yi changed his visage. He made a hand seal. The void around him shattered, and he disappeared from this space. When Yang Yi reappeared in the starry sky, the star compass under his feet twinkled with starlight. He's crazy. He wants to fuse with all the parasites in Devour's body. At that time, I'm afraid he will become a real monster, right? Yang Yi gazed at Devour's left eye with fear. Through the void, he saw countless parasites gathering in Songjie's body, expanding it unceasingly. A roar arose. The baby Devourer was expelled from Devour's body one more time. The baby Devourer wasn't satisfied. However, at this moment, the adult Devourer's body was also covered with terrifying parasites. Although the baby Devourer could easily kill them, there were too many of them. Every time the baby Devourer killed a group of parasites, more parasites would appear to stop the baby Devourer's invasion. They were like weeds that couldn't be destroyed. However, when the spring breeze blew, they would grow again. While the battle was taking place in the starry sky, a fragment floated outside the heavenly armor star. This fragment was the teleport continent that brought the god Lord Dohua and the others to the heavenly armor star. Chapter 1867. Karma. This giant beast looked like a whale. Its body was huge and there was a water spout on top of it. It spat out wisps of misty mist, giving people an ethereal feeling. A beautiful figure stood quietly on top of the giant beast. She gently stroked the giant beast under her feet and said softly, "Luo Yenjing, I've finally awakened you completely. From now on, you're free and no longer bound to anything." The Luo Yen whale's huge eyes rolled up. Looking at the beautiful figure, it chirped happily with a trace of gratitude in its voice. Zhuan stood quietly behind the beautiful figure and asked with a complicated expression, "Who are you?" When Zhuan left the world inside the Luo Yenjing, he left a transmitting formation in the Qin Tian tribe so that he could collect and use the netherworld water droplets cultivated in the Qin Tian tribe. In the world of Devour's left eye, Zhuan immediately thought of the teleport formation in this area after he had sensed that Songjie had been possessed by the strongest parasite. Thus, he used the reincarnation gate created by the slaughtering finger of Hades as a guide to teleport the master of the divine mausoleum and the others into Luo Yenjing's body. At that time, when Zhuan stepped into the gate of reincarnation, the transmission array inside the Luo Yen whale almost collapsed because it had been used too many times. In the end, it was the black-veiled woman in front of him who pulled Zhuan completely into the Luo Yen whale. However, the teleportation array in the Luo Yenjing's body was completely destroyed. Zhuan quietly stared at the black-veiled woman in front of him. He did not believe that a person he had never met before would be so willing to help him. The black-veiled woman's delicate body trembled slightly. She was still stroking the Luo Yen whale under her feet. She whispered, "Can you not ask now? If the time is right, I will tell you my identity." Zhuan stared at the back of the woman in the black veil. Then, his eyes pierced through the mist and fell on the empty starry sky. He said in a low voice, "A war is about to break out. When the time comes, the people of the heavenly armor continent will be annihilated. We must take the people of the heavenly armor continent into the smoke whale." The black gauze woman nodded slightly and said, "I will do it even if you don't tell me. But now it's not the right time. Both Yang Yi and Songjie are too powerful. We can only wait." Zhuowen nodded heavily. The Luo Yenjing's Luo Yen whale had a strong ability to confuse people. Even Yang Yi in the sky and Sangjie in Devour's body couldn't find the Luo Yenjing hiding under the teleport continent. Although the Luo Yenjing was Sky God Ganji's tamed beast, the black-veiled woman used some unknown method to forcibly erase the mark Sky God Gangu left on the Luo Yenjing, allowing the Luo Yenjing to regain its freedom. Since the black-veiled woman had given the Luo Yenjing its freedom, the Luo Yenjing was very close to her. It listened to almost everything she said. At this moment, Devour, the giant beast hovering in the starry sky, was covered by countless parasites. There were so many parasites that they flooded Devour like a flood. Yang Yi kept retreating. Devour and Sky Worm followed him closely, gazing at the adult Devour in front of them with vigilance. After all, what was happening to Devour was too strange. Squeak, squeak. All of a sudden, Devour's body emitted strange noises, which sounded like the sound of a beast eating. Then, Devour's giant body shrank unceasingly. Devour was covered by parasites. All of a sudden, it faced the sky and roared mournfully like a funeral. This mournful roar created a powerful sound wave that expanded everywhere. Then, the surrounding starry sky collapsed. Yang Yi hurried to step back. The sound wave created by the mournful roar was so terrifying that he didn't dare to get too close. Otherwise, he would be hurt by the sound wave. Most of the parasites on Devour's body exploded under the terrifying sound wave, turning into black blood. However, there were too many parasites. Although most of them had died, more parasites were coming to replace them. After Devour roared his last sorrowful cry, the vitality in his body vanished completely. Devour was on the verge of death, and he was in a deep coma. If the parasites hadn't devoured his flesh and energy, he would have been in a coma until he died. "Ha, you're finally dead. You've endured for so long. Finally, you're dead." The strongest parasite in Devour's body laughed crazily. Then, countless parasites swarmed into Devour's body. As the parasites swarmed into Devour's body, the aura of the strongest parasite became stronger. If this guy's aura continues to grow, I'm afraid he will break through to the heavenly god realm. Yang Yi grimaced, gazing at Devour, who was shrinking, and the strongest parasite in his body, whose aura was growing stronger. "Tianwei, how long will it take to break the immortal god-locking formation?" Yang Yi asked Yen Tianwei, who was standing not far behind him, while gazing at the strongest parasite that was growing stronger. At this moment, Yen Tianwei's forehead was covered in cold sweat. She had even taken out the divination's sacred talisman and combined it with the memory of her ancient sea of consciousness. She was using her knowledge of ancient restrictions to break the immortal god-locking formation in front of her. Moreover, Yang Yi was sharp enough to notice that as Yen Tianwei continued to break the formation, the power of the immortal god-locking formation was weakening. At the same time, the white chains on the surface of the heavenly god Gale axe were dimming. Shortly after, Devour in the starry sky was swallowed by the parasites. Then, the terrifying number of parasites moved toward the center. Soon, all the parasites had gathered in the center. There, a slender figure, dozens of meters tall, hovered quietly in the starry sky. This figure didn't look like a normal human. He had 4 limbs like a human, but his skin was as black as ink, emitting a metallic luster. His eyes were pitch black, and his pupils were in the shape of a 5-pointed star. Huge black tentacles grew from his head, which looked like hair, reaching his thighs from his back. "Ha! I'm finally free. I've swallowed Devour, the strongest race in this starry sky. From now on I'm called Devour. I've inherited Devour's formidable devouring power. In this starry sky, there's nothing that I, Devour, can't devour." Devour faced the sky and laughed. His sound waves were like sharp swords, filling the entire starry sky. Yang Yi, Tiangu, and the others paled when they felt the sound waves. Further away, on the heavenly armor continent, many warriors vomited blood, bleeding from their 7 orifices. They had almost lost their lives under the sound waves. "Tianwei," Yang roared. Devour had given him too much pressure, not only because of Devour's current strength, but also because of his formidable devouring power. Devour's devouring power was famous in the entire starry sky. It was said that the strongest Devourer could devour an entire star area. It was extremely formidable. Master, I'm afraid Devour's strength has reached the early heavenly god realm. Moreover, he has inherited Devour's devouring power. As Devourer continues to devour energy and matter in the starry sky, his strength will become more and more intimidating. He might even reach the true god realm, or even the legendary virtual sky realm. Tiangu couldn't help but step back, his eyes filled with fear. Devourer was called the strongest race in the starry sky because of its unique body structure. It could devour all kinds of energy and matter in the starry sky and turn them into its own. Because of this formidable devouring power, Devourer had endless possibilities. However, because Devour's devouring power was too heaven-defying, it would often devour planets. No matter if it was an abandoned planet or a complete planet full of vitality, it would devour everything. Thus, many warriors in the starry sky had joined hands to attack and expel Devourer. Devourer, who had been hiding in the heavenly armor star, had been expelled to the starry sky by many experts. At that time, Devourer was severely wounded. Moreover, his body had given birth to a new generation of Devourer. That was why the parasites in his body had seized the opportunity to attack him. Eventually, he was devoured by the strongest parasites. Since Devourer had inherited Devour's devouring power, it could be considered the new generation of Devourer. In other words, Devourer was even more intimidating because it had devoured Songjia. It had also inherited the wisdom of the human warriors. It knew how to show its power and endure. Thus, in the future, Devourer wouldn't be like Devourer, which could devour energy and matter in the starry sky. Instead, it would do it secretly. This was the most intimidating aspect. When Devourer developed secretly in the starry sky, it would become even more rampant in the future. At the same time, it would be a great calamity to the other star areas. It's broken! All of a sudden, Yen Tianwei screamed in surprise, which attracted Yang Yi's attention and made him happy. Behind them, the massive immortal lock god formation was collapsing, turning into countless white light dots. At the same time, the white chains binding heavenly god Gonggu were collapsing inch by inch. Heavenly god Gonggu, who had his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, there seemed to be countless centuries and planets collapsing. Rumble! The moment heavenly god Gonggu opened his eyes, the independent void world that Yang Yi had set up collapsed. Yen Tianwei, who was standing in front of heavenly god Gonggu, spurted out blood. She couldn't help but fly backward, gazing at Gonggu in fright. Just one look from him could hurt her. Wasn't heavenly god Gonggu a little too intimidating? Gonggu shot Yen Tianwei an indifferent look. Then, his eyes fell on Yang Yi as he said in a low voice, "Too slow." Yang Yi exhaled, nodding at Gonggu. "Not slow. It's just the right time. I'm afraid I need your help this time." Gonggu looked at Yang Yi, then at Devourer, who was standing in the starry sky. His eyes became more solemn. Devourer? No, he has Devour's aura, but it's different. Who is he? Gonggu frowned. Chapter 1868. Annihilation and Sword Light. Gonggu pondered. He glanced at Devourer in front of him and muttered, "So, that's how it is." The outer space is called the graveyard of planets. In the outer space, there are only abandoned planets. It's impossible to have a life planet. However, the heavenly armor star is in the outer space, but it's a life planet. Devourer is the reason for its formation. Heavenly god Gonggu understood. He had planned to give the star nucleus of the heavenly armor star to Yang Yi to refine and become a heavenly god. However, he had never thought that the heavenly armor star didn't have a star nucleus. Instead, it had Devourer. 10,000 years ago, Devourer wasn't as weak as he was now. Heavenly god Gongji's invasion had triggered Devour's counterattack, which had wounded him. However, shortly after, heavenly god Gongji's eyes were blazing. He looked at the infant Devourer floating not far from Yang Yi and said, Devour's bloodline? If we bring it back to the Sakyamuni territory, I'm sure the higher-ups of the Heaven territory will pay attention to it. At that time, our status will rise. At that time, even the Heaven sect that expelled me will have to curry favor with me. Yang Yi nodded and then turned to Devour. The only problem is this guy. Devour is one of the strongest races in the universe. It's rare. This guy used to be a parasite in Devour's body. He knows the value of Devour better than we do. Harumph. He's only at the early heavenly god realm. His cultivation base isn't much higher than mine. It's just wishful thinking if he wants to snatch Devour from us. Heavenly god Ganji's eyes were cold. He looked at Heaven Insect and said, "Come back." Heaven Insect's eyes were filled with fanatical worship. It hissed and turned into clouds of black mist, hovering around Heavenly god Gangu. Then, it turned into a black armor on Heavenly god Ganji's body. Someone erased the mark I left on the Luo Yenjing. Who has the guts to do that? Heavenly god Ganji's face darkened. While calling back Heaven Insect, he also wanted to call back the Luo Yenjing. However, he found that the mark he had left on the Luo Yenjing was gone. The heavenly devouring eye that I got from Devour's body is gone. Now, even the mark of the Luo Yenjing has been erased. Damn it. Don't let me find the culprit. Otherwise, I will make you regret it. Then, Sky God Ganj looked at the heavenly armor continent and heavenly armor planet behind him and said in a low voice, "The energy of this life planet is quite rich. You can let this baby devour the planet. Perhaps this little guy's power will reach the Sky God level. By then, he will be able to help me." Yang Yi smiled and said, "That's exactly what I was thinking. You guys talk a lot of nonsense. But speaking of which, I really have to thank you. If you hadn't invaded this planet and caused the death of so many experts of the heavenly armor continent, I wouldn't have been able to get so many nutrients, especially the top expert of the heavenly armor continent, Sanjia. It was after devouring this guy that I almost transformed, and even my intelligence was significantly improved." Devour's pitch-black eyes fell on Sky God Ganja's wound as he continued, "However, don't even think about taking the baby Devour away. I must have it. I'll give you a chance. Hand over the baby Devour, and I won't make things difficult for you. You can leave." Sky God Ganj laughed. He coldly stared at Devour and said, "Are you showing weakness? You want us to hand over the baby Devour? Only you can think of such a thing. If you don't want to hand it over, then die." Devour didn't want to waste time talking nonsense with Sky God Ganj. He stomped his right foot, shattering the starry sky within millions of miles. At the same time, he dashed towards Sky God Ganj like a wisp of smoke. Sky God Ganj didn't dare to be careless. He also took a step forward. It looked like he had just taken a step, but it felt like he had teleported a long distance with just one step. Sky God Ganj was a true spirit-severing realm expert. He had mastered the power of principles of heaven and earth. Because he had mastered the power of principles of heaven and earth, a spirit-severing realm expert could travel freely in the starry sky. Of course, he still needed the astrolabe to travel a long distance. Rumble. Devour and Sky God Ganja's fists collided. Countless starlight exploded around them. It was as if countless stars had exploded between them. Then, an extremely oppressive shockwave was generated between them. This shockwave was filled with the power of principles of heaven and earth. Just a trace of the power of principles of heaven and earth was enough to kill a celestial immortal realm expert and severely injure a true immortal realm expert. Rumble. In just an instant, Sky God Ganj and Devour were fighting like madmen. The shockwaves generated by each battle could be described as earth-shattering. The heavenly armor continent and the heavenly armor planet were even more affected. Even though they were far away from the battle, the shockwaves still caused the heavenly armor continent and the heavenly armor planet to tremble. Countless cracks appeared on the surface of the heavenly armor planet as if it would collapse at any moment. Countless warriors on the heavenly armor continent were terrified. Even the weaker warriors on the 4 continents outside of the middle mainland were kneeling on the ground, praying for the gods to calm down. Yang Yi frowned slightly as he watched Sky God Ganj and Devour fight from afar. Both of them were at the heavenly god realm. Yang Yi was just a peak demigod. He wasn't qualified to intervene in their battle. However, with Yang Yi's eyesight, he naturally noticed that the battle was leaning toward Devour. Devour had obtained Devour's devouring power. He could devour the matter and energy around the starry sky at any time. This allowed him to have an endless supply of energy, as if he would never run out. He could always maintain his best condition. However, Sky God Ganj didn't have such a devouring power. Every time he used a move, he would waste the star god power in his body. If this continued, Sky God Ganj would be defeated. I can only let this little guy devour the heavenly armor planet. As long as he devours this planet, this little guy will have the strength of a heavenly god. At that time, he can join forces with Sky God Ganj to fight against Devour. Yang Yi's eyes flickered. He patted Devour's head and said in a low voice, "Little guy, devour this planet. Then you'll have more power." Devour gently rubbed Yang Yi's right hand. Then, with a stomp of his right foot, he soared into the sky above the heavenly armor continent. Although Devour was much smaller than the adult Devour, it wasn't small compared to the entire heavenly armor continent. Devour's body was millions of zhang tall. As soon as he landed on the heavenly armor continent, he was like a dark cloud, shrouding the entire continent. What the hell is that? Seeing Devour in the sky, countless warriors on the heavenly armor continent were panic-stricken, shivering in fear. The pressure emitted by the infant Devour was too terrifying. At this moment, it felt like the entire continent was being pressed down by countless mountains. The atmosphere became extremely heavy. Devour looked down at the warriors on the heavenly armor continent disdainfully. Then he roared, opened his mouth, and spat out a black vortex that looked like a black hole. As soon as this black vortex appeared, it divided into 8 vortexes. One of them hovered above the heavenly armor continent, while the other 7 flew toward the surface of the heavenly armor star below the heavenly armor continent, firmly adhering to the surface of the heavenly armor star. As the suction force of the black vortexes grew stronger, the enormous heavenly armor star began to twist, like a folded piece of paper, and was pulled into the 7 black vortexes. The black vortex above the heavenly armor continent also had a strong suction force. Under the influence of the suction force, the heavenly armor continent began to twist. Countless warriors on the continent could clearly feel a terrifying pressure on their bodies. It was as if this terrifying pressure could crush them into countless pieces at any time. Could it be that it's over? In the heavenly armor continent, Yuan Hongwen, Ji Chenyan, and the others had already returned to the heavenly armor continent through the passage on the heavenly armor star. They didn't expect to encounter such a situation as soon as they entered the continent. Yang Yi, you are a member of the heavenly armor continent. Why did you help the evildoer and let this monster devour the continent? Yuan Hongwen roared at Yang Yi, who was standing not far from Devour. He wasn't willing to die like this. Yang Yi coldly looked down at Yuan Hongwen and said indifferently, "I've even killed the godlords of the Chaos Temple, Do Hua and Old Gu. Why should I care about ants like you? Right? I'm not a member of the heavenly armor continent. I'm from the noble Sakyamuni territory." Yuan Hongwen's eyes were crimson red. He clenched his fists tightly, feeling extremely bitter and shocked. In fact, when Yang Yi and Devour had rushed out of the heavenly armor star, he had guessed that the god lord Do Hua had met with a mishap. Now that Yang Yi had pointed it out, Yuan Hongwen felt even more indignant. What about my forefather? How is he? Ji Chenyan couldn't help but ask anxiously. You're about to die, but you still ask this. I admire you. I can tell you clearly that everyone who went deep underground is dead except for me, Yang Yi sneered. Ji Chenyan's face was as white as a sheet. She couldn't help but take a few steps back, her beautiful eyes filled with despair. At this moment, the suction of the black vortex intensified. The entire continent began to twist as if it would be sucked into the vortex at any time. All the warriors on the continent looked desperate. They knew that once the heavenly armor continent was sucked into the black vortex, they wouldn't be able to survive. In the eastern land, the 9 netherworld realm had been merged into a small world. In this small world, Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao were leaning against each other, raising their heads to look at the black vortex in the sky. Xiaoyun, where do you think that child Zhuowen is now? Now that the continent has reached its end, I just want to see him one more time before I die, Feng Xiao said with tears in her eyes. Long Xiaoyun's eyes were resolute. Xiao, Zhuowen will be fine. He has never disappointed us. I think he won't this time either. While the continent was filled with despair, a beam of sword light, like a bright moon, swept over from not far away. In a flash, it reached the black vortex above the heavenly armor continent. Bang! This beam of sword light was filled with an aura of facing death with equanimity. It contained the law of the birth of heaven and earth. The moment it landed in the black whirlpool, the terrifying suction force immediately froze. The heavy atmosphere that had permeated the continent immediately became much more relaxed under the light of the sword. Chapter 1869. Fight to the death. When the giant beast appeared in the sky of the heavenly armor continent, countless warriors on the continent focused their gazes on the giant beast's tall and straight figure. Their gazes were all fixed on it. Everyone recognized the identity of this tall and straight figure. This figure stood quietly on the Luoyan whale as the wind whistled and blew his long hair. Many years later, all the warriors on the heavenly armor continent would never forget this small but extremely huge figure. This figure was destined to be imprinted in everyone's hearts. This was because when the entire heavenly armor continent was at its most desperate, this figure appeared and broke through the huge black vortex in the sky, bringing hope to everyone. It seemed, Yuan Hongwen stared at the figure on the Luoyan whale in shock and trembled all over. Ji Qinyan's cherry lips parted slightly, unable to hide the surprise in her eyes. The sword earlier was simply too stunning. Even the two of them felt a trace of worship from the bottom of their hearts the moment they saw the sword. Zhuowen has appeared. In the nine nether realm of the eastern land, Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao, who were leaning against each other, were excited. They looked up at the figure on the Luoyan whale and cried tears of joy. Behind Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao, Long Xiangding, Long Dingtian, and the other top Ryuka officials, along with countless Ryuka people, were also staring at the fearless figure with fanatical eyes. They knew that this figure was a legend of the Ryuka. As long as this figure appeared, there would be a miracle. This thought seemed strange, but in the hearts of the Ryuka people, it was extremely firm. At this moment, in the continent, whether it was central or the four continents, all the experts who knew Zhuowen were looking up at the young man with the scabbard in his hand. There were mixed feelings, strange feelings, but more than that, there was hope. After Devour's devouring power was released, the entire heavenly armor continent was almost distorted by the devouring power. At that moment, everyone felt an unprecedented sense of despair. At the end of despair, a figure suddenly appeared. Everyone felt as if they were grabbing onto a life-saving straw. Boundless hope emerged in their hearts. This was human nature. At the most desperate moment, someone would step forward bravely. This person would become a great person in everyone's heart, a hero, bringing true hope. Almost all the celestial immortals and true immortals of heavenly armor continent had perished in the depths of heavenly armor planet. Right now, Yuan Hongwen was probably the strongest person on the continent. At this moment, Yuan Hongwen stared at Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen's aura was indeed very powerful and he could not see through Zhuowen's cultivation level, he knew that Zhuowen's cultivation level was above his, but he definitely had not reached the true immortal realm. Although Yuan Hongwen was extremely shocked and surprised by Zhuowen's cultivation speed, he was more disappointed. Brother Zhuo's cultivation level has not reached the true immortal realm. He is no match for this exotic beast and Yang Yi. Yuan Hongwen shook his head and sighed. Ji Qinyan's beautiful eyes darkened slightly. She said, "Brother Yuan, why do you say that?" Just now, Yuan blocked the black vortex released by the exotic beast. Yuan Hongwen sighed softly. Yang Yi is very strong. I have met him before. This person is related to the divine warring swords. His cultivation level might be a demigod. The exotic beast's strength is probably around that of a demigod as well. Even Songjie would not be able to contend against these two powerful people. Hearing this, Ji Chenyan's heart sank. The rest of the geniuses of Central Region were filled with despair again. Yang Yi looked at Zhuowen indifferently and grinned. I didn't expect you to be alive. Speaking of this, Yang Yi looked at the woman in black veil behind Zhuowen and said coldly, as the queen of Luo Yanwei, you actually removed the mark of warring swords without permission. You are very bold. The woman in black veil glanced at Yang Yi indifferently and said nothing. Bush, bush, bush. At the same time, several figures flew out of the Luo Yanwei's mouth. They were the master of the divine tomb, Fuxi, for genuine immortal Dao soldiers, Shi Ji, and the first mountain god. Leave Yang Yi and devour to me. Fuxi suddenly walked to Zhuowen and said in a deep voice. Zhuowen pondered and said in a deep voice, Senior Fuxi, you hold back devour. Leave Yang Yi to me. Do. Fuxi frowned. Fuxi frowned slightly. It wasn't that he looked down on Zhuowen, but Zhuowen's cultivation was just too weak. The gap between him and Yang Yi wasn't small. Facing Yang Yi was just courting death. Suddenly, a black light flew out from between Zhuowen's eyebrows. Cheng Huang flew out with the Fuxi cauldron and followed Xiaohe. Fuxi, believe in Zhuo. Although my master has been devoured by the parasite, he still has a backup plan, Xiaohe said in a deep voice. Fuxi looked at Xiaohe and then at Cheng Huang. Cheng Huang nodded. He knew that Xiaohe was right. Master, since you have been in the Nether Corp's forbidden ground all this time, why did you hide your aura and refuse to recognize me? Cheng Huang suddenly asked. Fuxi was silent for a moment. Then he smiled bitterly and said, I am no longer the original Fuxi. Cheng Huang still wanted to say something, but the golden coffin that sealed Fuxi suddenly opened, and a terrifying aura burst out of the coffin like a tsunami. A withered skeleton slowly sat up from the coffin. Other than the head, the rest of the skeleton was made of bones. The head was that of a middle-aged man. Zhuowen was familiar with the middle-aged man's appearance. It was Chao Yu, one of the 3 demigods from 10,000 years ago. Back then, my physical body collapsed and only my soul was left. Master used a great method to forcibly merge it into Chao Yu's demigod body. Although Chao Yu's demigod body was damaged beyond recognition due to his self-destruction, I have recovered most of my demigod power in the 10,000 years I have been in the Nether Corp's forbidden ground. Today, I will let Chao Yu's might return to the heavenly armor continent. Fuxi laughed and kicked the golden coffin with his right foot. Suddenly, the entire golden coffin flew into the air like a shuttle, heading toward the black vortex above. Bang, bang, bang. Originally, the black vortex was in a stagnant state due to the sword light. When the golden coffin hit the surface of the black vortex, a vast power exploded and the black vortex disappeared. The moment the golden coffin exploded, it turned into 7 surging golden lights, sweeping toward the 7 black vortexes that had devoured the heavenly armor star. The 7 black vortexes were destroyed one after another. Death is inevitable. It can be as heavy as Mount Tai or as light as a feather. I, Fuxi, have struggled at death's door for 10,000 years. Today, I can use my broken body to protect the heavenly armor continent. Fuxi's hearty laughter reverberated in the sky above the heavenly armor continent. He was like a shooting star, dashing toward devour. Fuxi, master. Zhuowen looked at Fuxi in silence. His heart was filled with an unprecedented passion. He knew that Fuxi's lifespan was not long. He was a dead man. Every time he used his demigod power, his lifespan would decrease gradually until he died. However, when his home was about to be destroyed, Fuxi burst out with all of his power, even if it meant sacrificing his life. It was a kind of belief. Devour was enraged when he sensed that the 8 black vortexes had been destroyed. He roared and dashed toward Fuxi. Fuxi's fighting spirit soared to the sky. He had been suppressing it for too long. 10,000 years couldn't be compared to this battle. A moth pursuing light will burn itself to death. I'm willing to protect my home and fight until I die. Fuxi roared and performed the shattering scripture. Streams of shattering power swirled around his body. Then he clenched his right hand, and the shattering power turned into a long spear. He threw the spear out like a rainbow piercing through the sky, hitting the infant Devour in an instant. Devour growled and slashed with his right claw. Black vortexes condensed into a massive black wall, blocking the shattering spear. At this moment, Fushi dashed in front of the spear. His right hand pulled the destruction spear out of the spear and swung it, shattering the black wall. Fushi's eyes were so cold as he thrust the spear into Devour's body. Unfortunately, Devour was one of the most powerful races in the starry sky. Even though he was just a baby, his body was terrifyingly strong. The spear couldn't break his body. However, Devour wasn't unharmed. Under the terrifying attack of the shattering spear, he couldn't help but fly backward. His eyes were filled with fear. First Mountain God, take the Azure Dragon Hall and bring my Ryuka people into the hall. I'll help you deal with this girl and Yang. I hope you can guide the warriors of the Heavenly Armor Continent into the Luo Yen Whale to avoid a big loss. Zhuan looked at the First Mountain God and the black-veiled woman. The First Mountain God nodded slightly, then took the Azure Dragon Hall and flew toward the eastern land. However, before he left, the First Mountain God slowly took out the black crystal given to him by Cangjia. He glanced at Zhuowen and thought to himself, I wonder if this thing will come in handy. The black-veiled woman was silent. She gently patted the Luo Yen whale. The Luo Yen whale roared and spat out dense Luo Yen fog. The Luo Yen whale sank into the Heavenly Armor Continent below. Moreover, the Luo Yen fog was not simple. It contained a binding force. When the warriors of the Heavenly Armor Continent came into contact with the Luo Yen fog, they fell into a daze. Then, they were guided into the Luo Yen whale by the Luo Yen fog. However, Yuan Hongwen, Ji Chunyen, and the other geniuses didn't intend to be guided into the Luo Yen whale. They refused to enter. They wanted to see how the battle between Zhuowen and Yang Yi would be. Zhuowen, are you okay? Shiji asked worriedly. I'm fine. By the way, Senior Shiji, can you help me capture Yen Tianwei? The remaining holy runes in her body are very useful to me. Zhuowen suddenly transmitted his voice to Shiji. Shiji pondered and nodded cautiously. Then his body shone with Buddhist light. He flew toward Yen Tianwei, who was behind Yang. Zhuowen, do you need my help? Shiji asked with a frown. Chapter 1870. Against Yang Yi. Seeing Shiji's action, Yang Yi sneered. He clenched his right hand and said, Immortal art, void devour. The void in front of Shiji, in an area of a few hundred feet, started to gather continuously, turning into a huge mouth that was about to swallow Shiji. Zhuowen's feet were filled with Dao intent. Shiji took a step forward and arrived in front of the void mouth. He grabbed the hilt of his sword and pulled it out. A ray of sword light was like the rising sun. Rumble! The sword light was truly powerful. The instant it stood in front of the mouth, the terrifying sword light scattered like flowers from a celestial maiden. It scattered into gorgeous splendor, while the mouth collapsed in the midst of the sword light. Substandard God artifact? Yang Yi stared indifferently at the scabbard in Zhuowen's hand. The instant Zhuowen had blocked Devour Infant's black vortex, Yang Yi had noticed that the scabbard in Zhuowen's hand was the substandard divine weapon of Zhan Bai, one of the Heavenly Armor Continent's 3 demigods. Shiji took a deep look at Zhuowen. The reason why he was not worried about letting Zhuowen deal with Yang Yi was because Yuan had Zhan Bai's substandard god artifact. Be careful, Shiji said in a deep voice. Soon after, his body emitted a demonic Buddha light. He used the demonic Buddha transformation, turning his body into a half-demonic Buddha and half-Buddha transformation. Yen Tianwei's face turned gloomy when she saw Shiji using the demonic Buddha transformation. Although she had absorbed the power of the holy talisman and her strength had increased greatly, she had only barely stepped into the ranks of true immortals. There was a big gap between her and a veteran true immortal expert like Shiji. Fortunately, she had the divination holy talisman. Although she was not Shiji's match, she would not be crushed by him. Just as Yang Yi was about to stop Shiji, Zhuowen once again drew his sword from his scabbard, while he took a step towards Yang Yi. The second ray of sword light was like the noon sun. Whether it was power or aura, it was much stronger than the first ray of sword light. When the second sword light swept out, Yang Yi's face began to change. He formed a seal with his right hand, and the void within a radius of several hundred feet around him exploded. The fragments of the void were like the strongest defense in the world. Bang! The second sword light slammed into the void fragment, but it only stagnated for a moment. Soon after, the void fragment was annihilated by the sword light. Yang Yi's eyes were gloomy, and he could not help but retreat step by step. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with battle intent as he took another step forward. With that step, he seemed to have crossed millions of miles and arrived in front of the second sword light in an instant. Then he slowly pulled out the iron sword from the scabbard again. Countless sword chi erupted from the scabbard, forming a violent storm of swords around Zhuowen's body, constantly sweeping and exploding in the surroundings. The storm of swords turned into a huge sword-shaped tombstone above Zhuowen's head. "Charge!" Zhuowen said softly. The sword-shaped tombstone broke through the air, following the second sword light, and swept in front of Yang Yi in an instant. The sword chi of the sword-shaped tombstone was too wild. Wherever it passed, the void would explode. Yang Yi was best at the power of the void. When the surrounding void was destroyed by the sword-shaped tombstone, he could not escape. Zhan Bai's substandard divine weapon is really extraordinary. But can you, a guy in the late stage of the celestial immortal realm, pull out the fourth sword? Or, with your physical body and strength, can you withstand the powerful pressure of the fourth sword? Yang Yi kept retreating. His eyes fell on Zhuowen. He saw that Zhuowen's body was trembling, and blood was flowing out from the corner of his mouth. Although the power of a substandard divine weapon was great, there was a price to pay to use it. Anyone below the level of demigod would have to withstand the powerful pressure left by the original owner of the substandard divine weapon. The blood splash 5 steps had accompanied Zhan Bai for too long. Although the blood splash 5 steps had always been an ordinary item, and even a little insignificant, it was the weapon that had accompanied Zhan Bai for the longest time. It was because of this that this ordinary item became extraordinary. When Zhan Bai became a demigod, it finally absorbed a trace of star god power from the starry sky and became a substandard divine weapon. The blood splash 5 steps had great potential. If it continued to accompany Zhan Bai and Zhan Bai did not die, it could become a real divine weapon. But 10,000 years ago, Zhan Bai's fall completely covered this extraordinary ordinary item with dust. But today, Zhuowen felt the excitement of the blood splash 5 steps. This excitement was naturally revealed when the blood splash 5 steps followed Zhan Bai in battle 10,000 years ago. Although the one holding it now was not Zhan Bai but Tun, the blood splash 5 steps weapon spirit could feel that its master had deliberately sealed it in between his eyebrows to wait for the fated one. And this fated one was Zhuowen in front of it. This fated one would carry its master's unfinished belief and complete the final battle. This was also the reason why Zhuowen could use a substandard divine weapon as a celestial immortal. However, 3 sword strikes were indeed the limit of what he could do now. If he forcefully used the 4th sword strike, his body would collapse and his soul would even be injured. Yang Yi's eyes were full of mockery. Then, he flicked his finger and took out a small knife that was a few feet long from his spiritual ring. Substandard divine weapon, Blade of the Void. You forced me to use my substandard divine weapon. You deserve to die. As he spoke, Yang Yi twisted his right hand and the small knife rotated in his hand. Then, it gradually disappeared into the void. When the second and third sword light appeared in front of Yang Yi, the small knife appeared again. Like a storm, it quickly circled around the 2 sword lights. While the small knife was circling around, black knife shadows were imprinted around the 2 sword lights. Then, as if time had stopped, the 2 sword lights were frozen in the void. Yang Yi stood proudly. He looked down at Zhuowen and mocked, Can you still use the 4th sword? His voice was like thunder, exploding in the sky above the heavenly armor continent. At this moment, the remaining experts of the Middle-earth immortal realm and above were watching the battle between Zhuowen and Yang Yi with fear. Especially when they saw that Zhuowen was seriously injured after using the 3rd sword, they were disappointed. That's too much. Brother Zhuo is only in the later stage of the heaven immortal realm. Even if he has a substandard divine weapon, the gap between him and a demigod is too big. Yuan Hongwen smiled bitterly. Zhuan slowly raised his head and pointed his right hand between his eyebrows. Suddenly, the Fushi cauldron in his sea of consciousness began to tremble violently. Meanwhile, the He Tu and the Luo scroll slowly floated around Cheng Huang in the Fushi cauldron. Cheng Huang looked at Xiao He silently and smiled. "It's time for me to complete my mission." As it spoke, an extremely terrifying and vast power emerged from the Fushi cauldron and began to merge into Zhuowen's body. At the top of the Fushi cauldron, a blurry figure appeared faintly. This figure was Songjie's shadow, the creator of the Fushi cauldron. Songjie looked at Xiao He with a smile and said, "Are you going to use my power so soon?" Xiao He's eyes were filled with sorrow. It stared blankly at the smiling Songjie but did not know what to say. With a choked voice, it silently watched Songjie's shadow gradually dissipate and merge into Zhuowen's meridians. Boom! In an instant, Zhuowen's aura skyrocketed and broke through the true immortal realm. Then, it reached the early stage of the true immortal realm, the middle stage, until it reached the peak of the true immortal realm. Moreover, after reaching the peak of the true immortal realm, the growth did not stop. Then, his aura jumped from the peak of the true immortal realm to the demigod realm. The moment his aura reached the level of the demigod realm, Zhuowen's right hand gripped the hilt of his sword tightly. Then, he quickly drew the fourth sword. When the fourth sword was drawn, countless stars fell. It was as if this sword could cut through the sky and reverse the galaxy. At the moment when the fourth sword was drawn, Zhuan quickly sheathed his iron sword and immediately drew the fifth sword. When the last two sword lights appeared, the entire sky was filled with a terrifying white light, illuminating the surroundings as if it was daytime. The sneer on Yang Yi's face suddenly froze. The speed of the fourth and fifth sword lights was too fast. In an instant, they blasted on the defense of the Blade of the Void. Then, the Blade of the Void flew out and was caught by Yang Yi. The first two sword lights and the last two sword lights joined together and instantly approached the space where Yang Yi was. Then, an extremely terrifying explosion erupted. A series of horrifying sounds of explosions rang out continuously. At the moment when the four sword lights exploded at the same time, Zhuan took a step forward. As if he had teleported, he swept to the side of Yen Tianwei, who was entangled with Shiji. Yen Tianwei naturally saw Zhuowen rushing over as well. She was already exhausted from running for her life under Shiji's attacks. Now that Zhuowen, whose aura had skyrocketed, had joined the fray, how could she possibly defend herself? Therefore, she made a prompt decision. Immediately, she used the power of deduction to calculate the next path of survival. However, she soon found that no matter how she tried to deduce, she found that there was no way for her to escape. Fight! Yen Tianwei's eyes were resolute. She suddenly threw out countless corpses from her spiritual ring. These corpses were collected from the serene corpse impasse over the years. 1,000 corpse lock. There were thousands of corpses surrounding Yen Tianwei. Under the power of her seal, they were arranged into the shape of a chain. At the center of the chain was a huge dragon corpse. This dragon corpse was hundreds of thousands of feet long. It had black wings on its back and its pitch-black scales were shining with a metallic luster. Damn it! Isn't this my corpse? What did this little girl do to this dragon lord's dragon corpse? What a bastard! Seeing the dragon corpse in the middle of the countless corpses, Xiao He in the sea of consciousness immediately flew into a rage. Zhuan narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "I will help you get this corpse." As he spoke, Zhuan pointed with his right finger and used the immortal technique Finger of Hell. With the support of Songjie's power, he had the power of a demigod for a quarter of an hour. Relying on the power of a demigod, the Finger of Hell he used was much more terrifying than before. The gate of reincarnation rotated continuously. Then, the circular gate slowly opened. Those corpses were all swallowed by the gate of reincarnation. They could not even attack. In an instant, except for the dragon corpse, all the other corpses were swallowed by the gate of reincarnation. When Zhuan approached the dragon corpse suddenly opened its eyes and swallowed Zhuan. Zhuowen stepped on the ground with his right foot and instantly retreated. Then he released Xiao He. Boy, leave this dragon corpse to me. She dared to make my corpse like this. I will not let this little girl go. Chapter 1871. Abrupt change under Xiao He's control, the dragon corpse was completely useless. After Xiao He freed the dragon corpse from Yan Tianwei's control, it returned to Zhuowen's Sea of Consciousness, while the dragon corpse was stored in Zhuowen's spirit ring. Yan Tianwei's eyes were gloomy. She didn't expect the 1,000-corpse lock to be broken so quickly. In shock, she quickly retreated. Unfortunately, Zhuowen was too strong at this moment. It had far exceeded her deduction ability. Not long after she retreated, Zhuowen had appeared behind her at some point. Yan Tianwei suddenly turned around. When she saw Zhuowen's cold and emotionless gaze, she couldn't help but take a few steps back. However, after taking a few steps back, she was shocked to find that a force like the might of the heavens surrounded her body, imprisoning her and making it impossible for her to move. Zhuowen's sword finger instantly landed between Yan Tianwei's eyebrows. Wait! Yan Tianwei cried out in alarm. Unfortunately, Zhuowen didn't care about Yan Tianwei's cry. Instead, his right hand formed a sword finger and instantly tapped on her forehead. Demigod energy poured in, causing Yan Tianwei to spit out a mouthful of blood. Her face was pale and bloodless. Zhuowen slowly pulled out a talisman from her forehead. I don't want to be as weak and sickly as before. Only this origin talisman can improve my physique and allow me to obtain great power. You can't do this. Yan Tianwei cried out crazily. It could be said that everything she did was to change her physique. This had already become her obsession. Now, Zhuowen had taken away the origin talisman from her body, which was equivalent to returning her to her original state. This was something she couldn't tolerate. Zhuowen didn't care about Yan Tianwei at all. His gaze was focused on the origin talisman he took out from Yan Tianwei's Sea of Consciousness. He could feel the aura of the 6 saint talismans: Wind Thunder, Ice Flame, Beast Envoy, Immortality, Revolving Stab, and Heavy Shield. On the other hand, Zhuowen had the Blood Sacrifice, Wind Lightning, Ice Flame, and King Blade Saint Talisman. Including Yan Tianwei, he had a total of 8 saint talismans. The only thing missing was the Prediction Saint Talisman. Where's the Prediction Saint Talisman? Zhuowen's origin talisman was as sharp as a knife. Yan Tianwei glanced at Zhuowen indifferently and mocked. Do you think I'll give that thing to you? Yan Tianwei. Dream, once I hand I'll be dead. Is that right? Zhuowen's eyes narrowed dangerously. Just as he was about to continue interrogating Yan Tianwei, not far away, the 4 sword lights suddenly exploded. Yang Yi stepped out with a gloomy look and headed straight for Zhuowen. Zhuowen's face changed slightly. He immediately put Yan Tianwei into his spirit ring. After exhorting Shiji, he turned to face Yang Yi, who was rushing straight at him. At this moment, Yang Yi was quite embarrassed. His eyes were full of anger. It was the first time in his life that he was so embarrassed. He couldn't accept it. I'll kill you today. Yang Yi's killing intent soared. He waved his sleeve and the blade of the void suddenly swept out like a boomerang. The moment it swept out, the surrounding starry sky began to collapse. Looking at the blade of the void that was constantly spinning towards him, Zhuowen's face turned solemn. He could feel an extremely powerful and shocking aura from the blade of the void. Zhuowen stared at the blade of the void that was spinning towards him. His right hand tightly grasped the hilt of the sheathed iron sword. A surge of aura soared up in Zhuowen's body. A formless ripple flowed from his palm into the scabbard. Instantly, the aura that surrounded Zhuowen's body increased explosively by around 2 times. On the other hand, Zhuowen's robe and black hair fluttered in the wind. He had imbued the power of Dao intent onto the substandard divine artifact, Bloody 5 Steps. This was the first time he had tried it. Although Dao will could increase his overall strength, Zhuowen's demigod power was Zhangji's power after all, not his own. Moreover, the Blood Splash 5 Steps wasn't his own weapon. Therefore, he wasn't sure whether Dao will would have any effect on it. However, the moment Zhuowen used the Dao intent, he found that the Dao intent could actually increase the power of Cangjie and the substandard god weapon blood splashing 5 steps. Yang Yi also noticed the sudden change in Zhuowen's aura. He slowly narrowed his eyes. However, his attention wasn't completely focused on Zhuowen. Instead, it fell on Master Devourer and God of Heaven Ganj, who were fighting not far away. Clang. Zhuowen slowly pulled out the iron sword. This time, the aura generated by the first sword he pulled out was too powerful. It was far stronger than the first sword he pulled out before. At the same time, Zhuowen took a step forward. Instantly, the terrifying aura increased again. It was as if countless volcanoes were erupting. The blade of the void was extremely fast. In an instant, it was already several dozen zhang away from Zhuowen. This distance was too short for an expert like Zhuowen. At the same time, Zhuowen was about to pull out the first sword enhanced by Dao Will. All of a sudden, the blade of void spun abruptly, drawing an arc in the air a few hundred feet in front of it, and then swept in another direction. Zhuowen's body trembled. He stared at the blade of the void in surprise. Soon after, he discovered that the corner of Yang Yi's mouth was curled up in a mocking smile. This smile was very strange. It actually gave Zhuowen a chilling feeling. It was as if Yang Yi's smile was hiding a chilly wind, which made Zhuowen feel extremely uncomfortable. At the same time, Zhuowen's eyes also fell on the trajectory of the blade of the void. He discovered that the blade of the void was heading towards the place where Master Devourer and God of Heaven Ganj were fighting. What is Yang Yi doing? This void blade is just a subgod artifact. It shouldn't be of any help in the battle between God Warspear and God Devourer, right? Zhuowen frowned slightly. He really couldn't figure out what Yang Yi's purpose was. Master Devourer and Ganj also noticed the approaching blade of the void. Master Devourer sneered and said mockingly, "An ant trying to shake a tree? How laughable." Ganj, on the other hand, frowned. He clearly didn't understand why Yang Yi suddenly intervened. However, he also knew that Yang Yi threw the blade of the void to help him. Unfortunately, Yang Yi's cultivation was only at the peak of the demigod realm. He couldn't help much. The blade of the void was extremely fast. In an instant, it reached the battlefield where the two were fighting. However, the two didn't pay it any attention. Whether it was Master Devourer or Ganj, they were both early Heavenly God realm experts. This divine tool really couldn't affect their battle. Bang! When the blade of the void was about 100 zhang away from Master Devourer and Ganj, it suddenly shattered. Within the shattered fragments of the blade of the void, a blood-red light instantly traversed 100 zhang. Before anyone could react, the blood-red light pierced through Ganj's chest and stopped there. Puchi! Ganj spat out a mouthful of blood as he stared at his chest. There was an unknown blood-red pattern on his chest. The pattern looked like a rose. It was bright and dazzling. When it bloomed, it was extremely dazzling. God slaying withering needle, Ganj retreated dozens of steps as he stared at the pattern on his chest. His face was filled with disbelief and doubt. He stared at Yang Yi, who wasn't far away, and the doubt in his eyes grew. He didn't know why Yang Yi had the God-slaying withering needle. He also didn't know why Yang Yi would attack him. Perhaps the others didn't know about the God-slaying withering needle, but Ganj was very clear about it. It was an extremely evil hidden weapon that was specially used to deal with heavenly gods. Once the needle pierced through a heavenly god's body, the sealing power within the needle would prevent the heavenly god's natal star from continuing to provide him with star god energy. Furthermore, the rose pattern on Ganji's chest would wither with the passage of time. When all the petals withered, it would be the time of Ganj's death. Zhuowen was also puzzled. He couldn't figure out why Yang Yi would do such a thing. Especially when he saw the god-slaying withering needle piercing through Ganj's body, it made him even more fearful. He had personally experienced how strong a heavenly god was. At least, it wasn't someone he could fight against at his current level. If Yang used this hidden weapon to deal with him, he was afraid that he, Zhuowen, would suffer a grievance. Not only Zhuowen, Shiji, Fushi, and everyone from the Heavenly Armor Continent were stunned. Obviously, they didn't expect Yang Yi, who was supposed to be on the same side, to attack Heavenly God Ganj. Why? Ganj found it difficult to breathe. The god-slaying withering needle had almost completely cut off the connection between his natal star and his natal star. He only felt that his body was getting weaker and weaker. However, he was even more puzzled about why Yang Yi would do such a thing. Although he addressed Yang Yi as his son in front of outsiders, that wasn't the case. Yang Yi's origin was quite mysterious. When he was banished to the extraterritorial starry sky, he met Yang Yi. At that time, Yang Yi guided him to the vicinity of the heavenly armor star. It was then that he discovered the heavenly armor star. Of course, Yang Yi had offered him a generous reward to refine the heavenly armor star and help him break through to the heavenly god realm. Yang Yi's reward was too generous. At that time, he didn't refuse and agreed to let Yang Yi take out the star core inside the heavenly armor star. However, he didn't expect a series of events that Ganj would never forget. You did all of this on purpose. What do you want? Ganj stared at Yang Yi and said. Yang Yi smiled faintly and said, I just want to watch a good show. If it's too evenly matched, it won't be a good show. A good show needs ups and downs, doesn't it? Ganj still wanted to say something, but Master Devourer seized the opportunity and rushed in front of Ganj. The tentacles on his head instantly shot out and wrapped around Ganj. Ganj wanted to resist, but unfortunately, he was too weak after being hit by the god-slaying withering needle. He couldn't resist Master Devourer's tentacles. Master Devourer gave Yang Yi a deep look. This was an excellent opportunity. Naturally, he wouldn't let go of this opportunity to devour Ganj. Master Devourer opened his mouth and spat out a black whirlpool. Then, Ganj was swallowed by the black whirlpool. The taste of a heavenly god is really not bad. Master Devourer patted his stomach and looked at Yang Yi. He smiled coldly and said, Since you helped me devour this heavenly god Ganj, I won't devour you. I'll let you die a good death. After saying that, Master Devourer waved his right hand casually. A terrifying wave of heaven and earth law condensed and formed a giant hand that grabbed at Yang Yi. Chapter 1872. The mysterious Yang Yi had no intention of resisting. He just stared at the giant hand indifferently. Swoosh! The giant hand grabbed Yang Yi and pulled him in front of Master Devourer. Then, Master Devourer opened his mouth, and a black vortex appeared, swallowing Yang Yi whole. Strong in appearance but weak in reality, he. Master Devourer sneered. At first, when Yang Yi used the god-destroying withering needle to attack heavenly god Ganj, he thought that Yang Yi wasn't simple. But now, it seemed that he was overthinking. Yang Yi's strongest skill was the god-destroying withering needle. After using it, he had no other skills. Something's wrong. Suddenly, Master Devourer turned around and saw Yang Yi looking at him indifferently. You're still here? Master Devourer furrowed his brows, his eyes sinister. He swallowed Yang Yi again, swallowing him into the black vortex. But soon, Master Devourer saw Yang Yi's figure behind him again. Instantly, Master Devourer's face turned ugly, and fear appeared in his eyes. Yang Yi's strange performance had made him shudder. The unknown was fear. Although Master Devourer was strong, he was still panic-stricken when encountering a phenomenon that couldn't be explained with common sense. In the distance, Yuan and Shiji landed on the sifting smoke whale. The battle between Fu Shi and Devourer had come to an end. Devourer looked at Fu Shi with fear. He retreated to a spot not far from Yang Yi, staring at Fu Shi coldly. What's going on? Fu Shi's aura was weak. Although he had fought Devourer didn't gain any advantage. Instead, Fu Shi's condition wasn't good. However, Fu Shi's condition wasn't very good. His strength was closely related to his lifespan. The more he fought, the more his lifespan would decrease. When all of his lifespan was exhausted, the Fu Shi would also die. Jun shook his head. He didn't know what was going on. When Yang Yi attacked heavenly god Ganj, he was puzzled. Now, Master Devourer had swallowed Yang Yi twice, but Yang Yi was still alive and standing in front of them. You still want to swallow me? Yang Yi said with a faint smile. He didn't know why, but when he saw Yang Yi's expression, Master Devourer's pupils shrank and his heart shivered. Master Devourer wasn't a fool. Instead, he was very smart. This Yang Yi was so strange that he could see some clues. You want to protect them? Also, why did you help me kill Heavenly God Gonggu? Master Devourer pointed at the people on the sifting smoke whale. Yang Yi smiled faintly. I once made a bet with a certain someone. I bet with him that the only life planet in the extraterrestrial starry sky would be able to survive. I bet that this planet will be destroyed, and my opponent bet that this planet will survive. Originally, if you and Gonggu didn't fight each other, you could join hands and destroy this heavenly armor planet. Unfortunately, the two of you are actually fighting endlessly over there. As for me, because of the bet, I can't act as I please. Thus, I can only sacrifice Gonggu. Master Devourer stared at Yang. When he saw Yang Yi reply slowly, he felt a chill in his heart. Heavenly God Ganj was strong enough to destroy the Heavenly God Ganj, right? Why did you choose me? Master Devourer was still puzzled. Yang Yi's smile became brighter. Devourer is one of the strongest races in the universe. His innate talents are extraordinary, and he's very rare. You've swallowed the flesh and blood of an adult devourer. You've inherited his devouring ability. You're a precious species. Isn't it a pity to kill you? Ganj is just an early heavenly god realm expert. It doesn't matter if he dies. The Sakyamuni territory doesn't lack heavenly gods, said Yang Yi indifferently. Yang Yi and Master Devourer didn't try to conceal their conversation. Everyone on the heavenly god whale heard them clearly. Zhuan furrowed his brows. Yang Yi was too mysterious. Initially, he thought that Yang Yi was heavenly god Ganj's son. However, from Yang Yi's actions and tone, he couldn't tell that Yang Yi had such a relationship with heavenly god Ganj. Moreover, Yang Yi's last sentence was full of confidence. It was as if he didn't put that powerful heavenly god in his eyes. Zhuan couldn't understand. After all, Yang Yi's cultivation was only at the peak of the demigod realm. Why did he have the courage to say such a thing? Moreover, Master Devourer's devouring ability could even devour heavenly god Ganj. However, Yang Yi was so strange that even Master Devourer couldn't do anything to him. These strange signs were enough to show that Yang Yi's origin wasn't simple. Moreover, it wasn't the first time that Zhuan had heard about the Sakyamuni territory. Heavenly god Ganj had also said that they came from the Sakyamuni territory. Before that, when he comprehended the Tao will on the ancient boulder in the War of Gods, the old man in Taoist robes had told him to go to the Heaven territory to find him. However, the Heaven territory wasn't called the Sakyamuni territory. It was called the Huaxia Heaven territory. Although Zhuan was unfamiliar with the so-called Heaven territory, he knew that the Heaven territory was probably much larger than a planet. However, he had never entered the Heaven territory, so he didn't know much about it. If there's a chance in the future, I'll have to make a trip to the Huaxia Heaven territory. Zhuan shook his head. However, his eyes were extremely vigilant as he stared at Master Devourer in the starry sky. Master Devourer's cultivation was at the early heavenly god realm. His cultivation and battle prowess were enough to destroy the entire heavenly armor planet and slaughter all the cultivators on the heavenly armor continent. Master Devourer stared coldly at Yang. From Yang Yi's last sentence, he understood that Yang Yi was treating him as a rare species. After all, he had a part of Devourer's bloodline and a complete devouring ability. However, Master Devourer also knew that Yang Yi was too strange. With his current strength, he couldn't kill Yang Yi. I've devoured the heavenly god Ganj, so I'm not far from the mid-heavenly god realm. If I devour the heavenly armor planet as well, I might be able to advance to the mid-heavenly god realm. At that time, I don't believe that I can't kill Yang Yi. Master Devourer's eyes flickered. Yang Yi's cultivation was only at the peak demigod realm. In Master Devourer's eyes, such a cultivation wasn't a threat to him. The only thing he hated was that Yang Yi's ghostly and strange movement skill allowed him to evade his devouring ability time and time again. Zhuan couldn't see through Yang Yi. If Zhuan had displayed such a terrifying movement skill from the beginning, Master Devourer knew that even if he had the strength of a demigod and Zhan Bai's blood-splashing 5 steps, he wouldn't be Yang Yi's opponent. Moreover, Master Devourer also noticed that Yang Yi's movement skill was similar to the legendary earth shrinking technique. It was said that this was a movement skill that was much more terrifying than greater teleportation. Even for a divine transformation realm expert, such a skill was something that could only be found by chance. In Zhuowen's impression, it was a skill that only existed in legends. Zhuowen was even more puzzled. Who was the person that Yang Yi had made a bet with? Moreover, Zhuowen was disgusted by the fact that Yang Yi had used the countless living beings on the heavenly armor planet as his bet. Whether it was Yang Yi or the person that Yang Yi had made a bet with, they had completely disregarded the countless living beings on the heavenly armor planet. This made Zhuowen extremely angry. At this moment, Master Devourer had made up his mind to devour the heavenly armor planet first. He would deal with Yang Yi after his cultivation improved. Master Devourer stomped his right foot and flew towards the heavenly armor continent. I'll kill all of you ants first. Otherwise, when I devour the heavenly armor planet later, you ants will give me a headache if you hinder me. Master Devourer's shrill voice reverberated. He was extremely fast and his entire body was like a cannonball. He streaked across the starry sky in a dazzling trajectory like a falling meteor. What should we do? In an instant, the countless heavenly armor continent martial artists in the Luo Yenjing were in a panic. Although they had entered the Luo Yenjing's inner world, the black-veiled woman had deliberately made it so that they could see everything that was happening in the sky. Everyone panicked when they saw that the terrifying Master Devourer was going to target them. They did not know what to do. I'll stop Master Devourer. You guys go with the Luo Yenjing first. Zhuowen said in a low voice. He took a step forward and leaped into the starry sky. Then, his Dao Will surged into the scabbard and he pulled out the iron sword. A sword light that was as blazing as the sun streaked across the starry sky and instantly landed on Master Devourer. Interesting. This brat has comprehended the power of Dao Will. He has enhanced the power of a demigod and a substandard divine weapon to such a powerful level. However, the gap between him and me is too big. Master Devourer sneered. He clenched his right hand and an invisible power of rules spread out in his palm, forming an invisible and transparent sphere. Bang! When the sword light reached the transparent sphere, there was a rumbling explosion. The sword light stopped in front of the transparent sphere. The moment Zhuowen swung the first sword, he swung the remaining 4 swords in a spurt of energy. The demigod power that Songjie had passed on to him could only last for 15 minutes. Zhuowen could feel that Songjie's power was slowly dissipating. Therefore, he did not dare to waste time. After swinging the sword 4 times, Zhuowen summoned the blood immortal from the spiritual ring. He then handed the spiritual ring to her and said in a low voice, "Take my spiritual ring and go to the Luo Yenjing. Escape with everyone. We can't stay here for long." The blood immortal looked at Zhuowen silently and nodded solemnly. Then she turned into a bloody light and went to the Luo Yenjing. At this moment, Fuxi on the Luo Yenjing also wanted to go out and help Zhuowen. However, he was stopped by the blood immortal. "Let's go quickly. Master will be fine. He has a blood substitution elixir. This elixir can replace him to die once. Now, the elixir is in my spiritual ring. Even if Master dies this time, he will be reborn in the spiritual ring. We should run as far as possible," said the blood immortal urgently. The black-veiled woman's beautiful eyes shrunk. She was worried about Zhuowen's safety, so she did not immediately control the Luo Yenjing to leave. Now that she heard the blood immortal's explanation, she controlled the Luo Yenjing without hesitation and rushed into the starry sky. Chapter 1873. Calculating the Luo Yenjing was extremely fast. In just a blink of an eye, it turned into a ghostly shadow in the starry sky. Although the Luo Yenjing's speed wasn't as fast as the star disk, it wasn't much slower. At this moment, Master Devourer was enveloped by the 5 rays of sword light. Under the support of the Dao Will, the might of these 5 rays of sword light was much stronger than before. Moreover, there were 5 rays of sword light shooting out at the same time. Even Master Devourer couldn't break free completely in a short period of time. As for Yang Yi, He was floating not far from the starry sky. He indifferently gazed at the Luo Yenjing, but he didn't chase after it. Instead, he gently patted Devour. "Little guy, I'll leave the Luo Yenjing to you." Devour looked at Yang. Although it didn't want to accept Yang Yi's order, the familiar feeling in its mind made it obey Yang Yi's order. Sush. Although Devour hadn't reached adulthood yet, its size could be compared to the Luo Yenjing. Devour's genes were much stronger than the Luo Yenjing's. Its speed in the starry sky was much faster than the Luo Yenjing's. After receiving Yang Yi's order, it only took Devour a quarter of an hour to catch up with the Luo Yenjing. "Leave Devour to me. You guys go." Fushi's eyes darkened. His body flashed, dashing toward Devour, who was roaring toward him. Fushi, Shiji couldn't bear to watch. At this moment, Fushi's entire body was shrouded in death aura. His lifespan was constantly decreasing. If he continued to fight, his remaining lifespan would eventually be exhausted and Fushi would also die. What's wrong with dying? Everyone has to die. I don't want to live an ignoble life. I'm willing to die fighting. The moment I got out of the coffin, I made up my mind. Hovering in the starry sky, Fushi turned around and smiled at Shiji and the others. His face was free and easy. Shiji's eyes immediately turned red. It was not just Shiji. All the people from the heavenly armor continent who were watching from the fog whale could not help but feel their hearts ache. Fushi, Yuan Hongwen's eyes were bloodshot as he clenched his fists tightly. He really wanted to go out and help, even if he had to fight to the death like Fushi. However, he was too weak. He did not even have the qualifications to enter the starry sky, let alone fight. Therefore, he could only stare blankly at the battle between Zhuowen and Fushi. This sullen feeling caused Yuan Hongwen to feel extremely uncomfortable in his heart. Not only Yuan Hongwen, but everyone in Luo Yenjing's inner world also felt extremely aggrieved. The heavenly armor continent was their home, but they were forced to flee like stray dogs. Moreover, because they were too weak, they couldn't even leave the starry sky. It could be said that they didn't even have the qualifications to die in battle. This kind of incompetence and powerlessness made everyone feel sad from the bottom of their hearts. Rumble. Suddenly, the Luo Yen whale roared. Everyone felt the world inside the Luo Yen whale constantly shaking, as if the world inside the Luo Yen whale was shaking like a bottle. Everyone's eyes were filled with fear and panic. What happened? Yuan Hongwen frowned slightly. Immediately, he looked through the Luo Yen whale's line of sight and fell on the starry sky in front of the Luo Yen whale. He found that the starry sky in front of the Luo Yen whale was distorting and collapsing. It was as if the starry sky in front of the Luo Yen whale was folding like a piece of paper, blocking the Luo Yen whale's way. "It's Yang. You guys be careful. I will control the Luo Yen whale to break through the distorted starry sky in front of us." The black-veiled woman's beautiful eyes were dignified. She made a seal with both hands and gently patted the Luo Yen whale under her feet. Then, a strange pattern appeared on the Luo Yen whale's scalp. This strange pattern was in the shape of a sharp quadrangle, like a sharp sword without a hilt. As soon as the sword pattern appeared, the water spout on the whale's head abruptly spewed out extremely dense smoke. The smoke was like a substance, condensing in front of the Luo Yen whale's head and forming a sharp sword tip. Bang! The Luo Yen whale was extremely fast. In an instant, it hit the distorted starry sky in front of it. Then, there was an extremely harsh explosion. The impact was so powerful that even the Luo Yen whale made a sound like a sorrowful cry. Then, its huge body began to shake violently. Everyone in the Luo Yen whale's inner world was affected by this strong shaking force. Some people could not stand steadily and fell down. Many buildings in the small world also collapsed under this violent shaking. Break! The black-veiled woman was extremely calm. She changed the seal with both hands again and patted the Luo Yen whale's body. The Luo Yen whale released even more terrifying smoke, which gathered in the Luo Yen whale's head and made the sharp air more condensed and fierce. Bang! With a muffled sound, the distorted starry sky in front of them was shattered. The Luo Yen whale, with a somewhat shaky body, rushed out of the countless void fragments. However, at the moment when the Luo Yen whale rushed out of the distorted starry sky, the shattered void fragments regrouped and turned into a hand of nothingness. The target of this hand of nothingness was the blood immortal on the Luo Yen whale. This hand of nothingness was too fast, and the timing was very precise. The moment the Luo Yen whale rushed out was also the moment when everyone in the Luo Yen whale was the most relaxed. The blood immortal did not even have time to react before the hand of nothingness grabbed her and pulled her into the shattered starry sky. "Oh no!" Shiji shouted and immediately released the Buddha demon body. He squeezed his hands and condensed a Buddhist commandment blade and a devil blade with Buddhist power and devil power respectively. The two blades chopped out, cutting out two different colors of gold and black in the starry sky and bombarding the hand of nothingness. The illusory hand was very clever. It suddenly threw the blood immortal away like a piece of trash. At the same time, the Buddhist commandment blade and the devil blade chopped at the same time and cut off the hand of nothingness. Shiji and the black-veiled woman's faces were extremely ugly. Shiji's attack was decisive enough, but the hand of nothingness was even more decisive and fast. It was almost impossible for Shiji and the black-veiled woman to attack again. After all, the Luo Yen whale and the blood immortal were moving in opposite directions. Even if it was only for a moment, the distance between them was extremely far. The Luo Yen whale wanted to turn around, but it was too late. Shiji and the black-veiled woman were not demigod experts, so it was almost impossible for them to travel through the starry sky. Even if they managed to get out, they could only fly for a short while and their lives would be in danger. Moreover, the hand of nothingness did not know whether it was intentional or not, but the hand of nothingness sent the blood immortal flying in the direction of the battle between Fushi and the infant devourer. Fushi frowned slightly. Of course, he noticed the blood immortal flying in the opposite direction. The blood immortal had Zhuowen's spiritual ring, and she said that there was a resurrection treasure in the spiritual ring for Zhuowen. If something happened to the blood immortal, Zhuowen would be in trouble. Thinking of this, Fushi gritted his teeth and gave up on the infant devourer. Instead, he flew in the direction of the blood immortal. The starry sky around the infant devourer suddenly collapsed. Then, the infant devourer disappeared from where it was. It actually came out of the starry sky beside the blood immortal before Fushi. It opened its mouth and spat out a black whirlpool, swallowing the blood immortal. Fushi was stunned. His eyes instantly turned red. The blood immortal was swallowed, and Zhuowen's resurrection was hopeless. His sacrifice was in vain. Die! Fushi roared. The power of destruction in his body surged out. His entire body was covered by the power of destruction, and his figure became hazy. Fushi almost used his life to activate the shattering scripture, as if he had become the source of destruction. The infant devourer roared. The starry sky around it shattered again, and its huge body disappeared again. When the infant devourer reappeared, it was not far from Yang. Yang? Fushi was burning with anger, and he stared at Yang. While he was angry, Fushi was also very afraid. Of course, he had seen everything that had just happened. It was Yang Yi who had twisted the starry sky in front of the Luo Yenjing. And it was also Yang Yi's intention that the starry sky in front of the Luo Yenjing was easily shattered. His purpose was to make everyone on the Luo Yenjing less nervous, which was enough to pave the way for him to set up a trap. Therefore, in the end, the huge hand formed by the shattered void fragments could so easily grab the blood immortal and throw her to the other hidden hand that it had placed on the infant devourer. This was a series of traps. Yang Yi's purpose was not to stop the Luo Yenjing, but the blood immortal. To be more precise, it was Zhuowen's spiritual ring on the blood immortal. Although Yang Yi did not know that Zhuowen had the blood substitution elixir that could resurrect, it did not mean that he was a fool. From the change in expression of the black-veiled woman, Shiji, and the others, he could see some clues. And the blood immortal was probably the key to their change in expression. After all, Zhuowen was only a demigod, but Devour was already a divine realm expert. Although Zhuowen had the power of Tao Will, the gap was too big. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Zhuowen's action was like a moth flying into a flame. But Juan did not even think about it. He took the initiative to stop Devour, let the blood immortal out, and gave the spiritual ring to her. Yang Yi smelled something unusual in the first place. That was why he had set up a series of traps just now. What a scheming person! The black-veiled woman and Shiji looked at each other and felt a chill in their hearts. They had been cultivating for a long time. It was not that they had never seen scheming people, but it was the first time that they had seen someone as scheming as Yang Yi. And the series of actions that Yang Yi had done before made the black-veiled woman and the others feel even more unfathomable. They could not figure out what Yang Yi's purpose was. Was it really like what he said before? Did he just want to watch a good show? Now, I want to see if that brat Zhuowen will still be able to remain calm in the face of his master's attack. Yang Yi smiled as he looked at Chuan, who was still facing Devour in the distant starry sky. Bang, bang, bang. A muffled sound rang out from Zhuowen's location. Chi Ho, who had been surrounded by 5 consecutive sword lights, suddenly leaped out, and the 5 sword lights collapsed with a loud bang. Yang Yi. Chapter 1874. Level 2 Dao Intent. The might of your divine artifact isn't bad. It was actually able to put me in such a sorry state. But as far as I know, this should be your strongest trump card, right? Even your strongest trump card can't cause any damage to me. What qualifications do you have to stand before me? Master Devourer sneered. There were 5 hideous wounds on its body. These 5 wounds were obviously caused by the 5 sword rays from before. However, these 5 wounds were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Zhuowen's eyes were extremely sharp. Although Master Devourer's face was filled with indifference, he was still able to detect the trace of exhaustion in its eyes. Obviously, it wasn't easy for Master Devourer to deal with the 5 sword rays from before. After all, Zhan Bai's bloody 5 steps wasn't an ordinary substandard divine artifact. Coupled with the support of Dao Intent, its might was extremely impressive. Moreover, Master Devourer was too careless when it dealt with the 5 sword rays. It didn't take the 5 sword rays seriously, so it suffered a loss. Although Master Devourer didn't seem to care about Jun, it was actually burning with rage in its heart. It wished for nothing more than to kill Zhuowen immediately. The Master Devourer bounced off its legs and shot toward Jun like a meteor. It clenched its right hand and condensed the energy of the laws of heaven and earth into a spear. It swept toward Zhuowen's chest. Zhuowen's face turned pale. After Master Devourer suffered a loss, it didn't hold back anymore. It attacked with its full strength and was determined to kill with a single strike. Use blood-splashing 5 steps again. Jun sighed faintly and revealed a trace of bitterness in his eyes. He clearly felt that Sangjia's demigod energy was gradually disappearing, and the side effects of executing bloody 5 steps had already taken effect in his body. He was very clear that if he executed bloody 5 steps again, even a saint physique at perfection would probably collapse. Moreover, it was very likely that he would meet his end because of this. However, he already had no other way out. Especially when he saw that the 5 sword rays from bloody 5 steps supported by Dao Intent could really affect Master Devourer, he had already planned to execute bloody 5 steps again. Thinking of this, Zhuowen slowly stepped forward. His right hand gripped the hilt of the sword on his left, and his eyes suddenly became fierce and resolute. Since he had already made up his mind, Zhuowen would not back down, even if it meant losing his life. Clang. Zhuowen's resolute belief and will to face death with equanimity made his thoughts grow at the speed of light. A mysterious concept slowly lingered around Zhuowen's body. This profound concept was extremely mysterious. Like a stone falling into the water, it actually spread out invisible circular ripples in all directions. Moreover, this formless ring-shaped ripple was becoming denser and more intense. In an instant, the space around Zhuowen in an area of 30,000 m, 300,000 m, and 10,000 m was suddenly filled with this shapeless ring-shaped ripple. It was as if the surrounding space had become a calm water surface at this moment, and Zhuowen had become the stone that caused the ripples. Master Devourer's gaze was ferocious and terrifying. It bared its fangs, and the aura of its entire body surged out. The powerful aura that belonged to a heavenly god was enough to crush a true immortal realm cultivator to death. However, the instant it stepped into the 300-meter radius around Zhuowen, the formless ripples suddenly filled its surroundings, causing its expression to change slightly. The aura of the formless ripple caused Master Devourer to be fearful, and its heart thumped wildly. It was as if the formless ripple could completely affect its state of mind, causing it to involuntarily stop moving. Yang Yi, who was originally calm and composed, couldn't help but constrict his pupils. His expression was gloomy as he stared at Jun, whose formless ripples were becoming more and more violent. He muttered in a low voice, "The concept of Tao intent, in the heavenly domain of Huaxia, which was extremely far away from the starry sky, there was an inconspicuous Taoist temple within an inconspicuous hill. Within the Taoist temple, a Taoist quietly knelt on a cushion before the temple's entrance, and another figure similarly knelt before him. This figure was a middle-aged man. His hair was disheveled, and he looked like a beggar. His eyes were narrowed, and there was a wisp of drunkenness on his cheeks. A red wooden chessboard was placed before the two of them, and the two of them were silently playing chess. Their surroundings were quiet and tranquil. Ding! The instant the Taoist placed his chess piece on the chessboard, he seemed to have sensed something, and the chess piece in his hand landed on the chessboard. His gaze rose slightly, and it fell onto the starry sky outside the Taoist temple. The middle-aged man with disheveled hair followed the Taoist's gaze and looked in the direction the Taoist was looking at. His eyes slowly narrowed, and he said in a low voice, "The energy of Tao intent. From the looks of it, someone is about to comprehend the second level of Tao intent?" The middle-aged man lightly smiled and didn't pay too much attention to it. Because even though geniuses that had comprehended Tao intent were rare in the Huaxia Heaven territory, it wasn't like there weren't any. Under the enormous base, no matter how small the probability was, the number wasn't small. Of course, these were all geniuses that had comprehended the first level of Tao intent, whereas the number of geniuses that had comprehended the second level of Tao intent had decreased sharply. But it wasn't enough to draw the attention of an expert of his status. So, the middle-aged man was extremely puzzled by the Taoist's performance. The Taoist lightly picked up the chess piece that he had placed down and slowly placed it on the corresponding position on the chessboard, and then he laughed lightly. Second-level Tao intent really isn't rare in the Huaxia Heaven territory. But comprehending second-level Tao intent after comprehending the first level of Tao intent less than half a year ago is something I've never seen. Ding! The smile on the middle-aged man's face froze, and the chess piece in his hand fell onto the chessboard with a clang. After rolling a few times on the chessboard, it scattered to the side. The middle-aged man abruptly stood up, and he stared fixedly at the Taoist as he said in a low voice, "You've just comprehended the first level of Tao intent less than half a year ago, yet you've already touched the second level of Tao intent? Tai Ching, you're not joking, right?" The Taoist lightly smiled, and then he slowly placed down a chess piece and said, "You've already reached a dead end. How are you going to resolve this dead end?" The middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "You've won this round. Also, is what you said earlier true? Comprehending first and second level Tao intent in less than half a year? This is too terrifying, and I've never seen such a thing." The Taoist lightly smiled and said, "This is the first time I've seen it as well. This little fellow has given me quite a pleasant surprise." "Who exactly is this little fellow you're talking about? This kind of genius should be brought back to the Huaxia Heaven territory to focus on nurturing. This kind of peerless talent can't be buried." The middle-aged man had a rather impatient temper as he spoke. "The Tao is natural, so why do we have to do it deliberately? This kid was able to have such good fortune because he went with the flow. If we did it deliberately, I'm afraid there would be many restrictions on him and it wouldn't be beautiful." The Taoist spoke indifferently. However, the middle-aged man refused and said, "But we can't just leave this kid outside like this. Think about it, our Huaxia Heaven territory is currently the weakest among the 8 heavens. If this kind of genius is kidnapped by the other heavens, it'll be too late for us to cry." The Taoist calmly said, "Kidnapped? They wouldn't dare, Because this little fellow is the key to the bet between me and Sakyamune. Before the outcome of this chess game between me and Sakyamune is decided, no one dares to act recklessly. Sakyamune? You actually made a bet with that perverted guy? What's the bet? The middle-aged man frowned and asked. Sakyamuni was the ruler of the Sakyamuni domain, and Sakyamuni domain was the strongest heaven territory among the 8 heavens. Its might was unparalleled, and it was deeply feared and revered by the other heavens. The middle-aged man didn't expect this Taoist to be so bold as to actually dare to make a bet with Sakyamuni. The bet is the mysterious and formidable Devourer race in the starry sky. The Taoist smiled faintly, and then he continued, but I never expected that during the process of this bet, there would actually be a pleasant surprise that even I couldn't imagine. Devour? Didn't that thing go extinct before the era of the heaven territory? You were actually able to find the descendant of such a formidable race? The middle-aged man's pupils constricted into needles as he spoke in a low voice. Moreover, he knew that this so-called pleasant surprise was probably the little fellow who had comprehended the first-level Tao insight for less than half a year before comprehending the second-level Tao insight. Moreover, that fellow Sakyamuni's clone isn't too far away from that little fellow. You know that Sakyamuni is extremely competitive and won't easily admit defeat. Even if he uses some small tricks, he won't frown at all, said the Taoist indifferently. However, the middle-aged man couldn't sit still. How could this be? Sakyamuni's clone isn't too far away from that little fellow. If Sakyamuni wants to kill that little fellow, then that little fellow will definitely die. No, I won't believe in your bullshit Tao of nature. I have to go to the starry sky to take a look. I can't let that fellow Sakyamuni destroy such a genius. As he spoke, the middle-aged man stomped his right foot and instantly disappeared from the spot. If one were to look closely, this man's stomp had actually crossed countless planets and shuttled through the starry sky. It was as if the boundless starry sky was just a short path that could be traversed in a few steps. This was a divine ability that was of a much higher level than greater teleportation. Even a divine transformation expert might not be able to master this powerful divine ability, but it was as simple as eating a meal for this man. Yuqing is still so impatient. Since it's Yuqing's decision, then it's Tao of nature. The Taoist smiled and waved the horsetail whisk in his right hand. His entire body turned into a puff of green smoke and disappeared from the place. In the starry sky, Zhuan slowly opened his eyes. At this moment, countless ripples appeared in his eyes. The mysterious power that was revealed by the Tao will was growing by the hundreds and thousands in Zhuan's body. The Tao will has become stronger. Zhuan's eyes were filled with confusion. Then he slowly drew out his metal sword. The sword light was like the scorching sun. When the sword was drawn, the heavens and the earth cracked. The invisible ripples in the surroundings surged wildly like a tsunami. Master Devourer's pupils shrank to the size of needles. Although it was still the first sword light, for some reason, he felt an extremely strong sense of threat from it. That must have been an illusion. This kid's move is the same. He can't do anything to me. Master Devourer forcefully suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. He opened his mouth and spat out a black vortex. A powerful suction force surged out, as if it could swallow the entire starry sky. Rumble! Chapter 1875. The sixth sword. The moment the black vortex shattered, Master Devourer retreated without hesitation. His eyes were filled with fear as he stared at the powerful sword light that was shooting towards him. Swoosh! Devourer's sword. Master Ho coldly snorted. The long tentacle above his head suddenly broke. After which, the long tentacle wriggled continuously. Finally, it turned into a huge black sword. The huge sword was extraordinary. Strangely, there were many black vortexes revolving around the huge sword. The black vortexes were thumb-sized and they were densely packed around the huge sword. The black vortexes were filled with an extremely powerful devouring power. At this moment, the sword light was right in front of Master Devourer. Master Devourer's eyes were cold. The sword finger on his right hand touched the Devourer sword's body. When his sword finger slowly slid to the tip of the Devourer sword shot out like an arrow from a bow, directly piercing the sword light. A terrifying explosion resounded. Although the sword light was powerful, the Devourer sword that Master Devourer had used was even more powerful. It destroyed the sword light directly. After destroying the sword light, Master Devourer heaved a sigh of relief. He thought that although Zhuowen's strength had increased tremendously, it was still not enough to compare to him. "What are you thinking about now?" Suddenly, a cold voice sounded. Master Devourer turned his head. His eyes narrowed as he realized that Zhuowen had appeared behind him without him noticing. Master Devourer wanted to ask why Zhuowen was so fast, but Zhuowen had already pulled out the iron sword with his right hand. With lightning speed, he slashed the sword a second time. After slashing the sword a second time, he did not stop and slashed the sword a third time. The two sword lights merged together and formed a huge sword light that crossed each other. In an instant, it was right in front of Master Devourer. Swoosh! The crossed sword light pierced through Master Devourer's body. Master Devourer's eyes narrowed as he was caught off guard. He was cut into 4 parts by the crossed sword light. Zhuowen's gaze was cold and indifferent as he gazed at the Master Devourer that had already been blasted into 4 pieces by the sword light, yet he wasn't particularly surprised. After all, after his Dao insight had advanced to the 2nd level, his overall strength had doubled. Originally, Zhuowen's blood splatter 5 steps sword light, which was enhanced by the 1st level of Dao insight, was already able to injure Hou Fei. Now that his Dao insight had been upgraded to the 2nd level, the sword light he unleashed was completely capable of injuring Hou Fei. On top of that, the 2nd level Dao insight had boosted Zhuowen's speed even further. It had even surpassed Master Devourer's own speed. This was also the reason why Master Devourer didn't notice Zhuowen when Zhuowen arrived behind him. Instead, he was struck by Zhuowen's 2 sword lights. The Master Devourer, which had been cut into 4 parts by the sword light, formed 4 balls of black fog. They kept wriggling and moving closer to each other. It was obvious that they were trying to reassemble. Zhuowen naturally wouldn't let him have his way. He would take advantage of his weakness to take his life. At the thought of this, Zhuowen pulled out his sword once again. This time, it contained a terrifying power that could destroy the rules. When the sword light shot out, it transformed into a myriad of sword essences that were like meteors. A miserable shriek resounded. Shortly after, the Master Devourer, who had been cut into 4 parts, was completely crushed into black powder by the myriad of sword essences. "Disappear!" Zhuowen's gaze was cold. With a clang, he pulled out his 5th sword. The 5th sword had already reached the peak of Zhuowen's strength. It was the strongest move he had ever used. The 5th sword was too powerful. The Master Devourer, who had been crushed into black powder, let out an even more terrifying shriek. He knew very well that if he was hit by the 5th sword, he would definitely die. Clang. Unfortunately, when the 5th sword light swept out, the void around Master Devourer, which had been shattered into countless pieces, suddenly became independent and formed an independent void. The independent void distorted like a whirlpool and disappeared before Zhuowen's eyes. As for the 5th slash, it directly swept past the void that had been isolated and disappeared. It just so happened to pass by the void that had disappeared. At the same time, an extremely strong sense of danger suddenly rose in his heart. Bang! A palm silently descended onto Zhuowen's back. On the other hand, Zhuowen seemed to have noticed it, and he stomped with his right foot while 2nd level Dao insight suffused his feet as he swiftly retreated. Unfortunately, the speed of this palm was too swift. At the instant Zhuowen retreated explosively, it heavily smashed onto Zhuowen's back. Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood, and he relied on the force of the recoil to shoot out explosively. After that, he looked at Yang Yi, who was nearby behind him. "Your reaction isn't bad." The corners of Yang Yi's mouth curled up slightly. He stared indifferently at Zhuowen, who retreated explosively and continued. "Your natural talent is really not bad since you're able to comprehend 2nd level Dao insight in such a short period of time. It has exceeded my expectations as well." Zhuowen was blasted flying, and he stared fixedly at Yang Yi, who had a gaze that was calm like water. At this moment, Yang Yi's image in his heart suddenly expanded countless times. It was as if the Yang Yi he was facing at this moment was no longer the demigod Yang Yi from before, but a peerless expert who was heavily pressuring him. Although the aura on Yang Yi's body was still that of a peak demigod, that aura gave Zhuan an extremely subtle feeling. You? Who exactly are you? This subtle feeling caused Zhuan to involuntarily ask this question that even he felt was inexplicable. Yang Yi did not directly answer Zhuan's question. Instead, he muttered to himself, "This time, your divine artifact should be able to continuously release 5 sword strikes. After releasing 5 sword strikes, you must have a blank period of time to relieve yourself. Moreover, the price to release sword strikes is extremely high. After releasing 5 sword strikes consecutively, I'm afraid your body is already somewhat unable to bear it, right? Moreover, the power that Sangye gave you is also gradually draining away. You are already powerless to reverse the situation." Yang Yi's gaze was indifferent. He looked at Zhuan with a trace of pity. Zhuan sighed silently in his heart. Yang Yi was right. 5 sword strikes was already his limit. Moreover, Sangye's power was about to dissipate. In addition, Yang Yi had seized the opportunity to severely injure him. Therefore, he was indeed at the end of his road. "Zhuan, as your former senior brother, today I will give you a quick death," Yang Yi said faintly. He waved his right hand gently, and the void around Zhuan suddenly stagnated. Above Zhuan's head, countless starlight condensed and turned into a huge starlight saber shadow that was as huge as a dragon. This saber shadow was so huge that it lay across the starry sky, as if it had divided the entire starry sky into 2 halves. Jun. Seeing this scene, the black-veiled woman on the Luo Yen whale, Shiji, and many warriors of the heavenly armor continent could not help but call out Zhuan's name. "We have to save him." The black-veiled woman's beautiful eyes revealed a determined look. She planned to make a hand seal to control the Luo Yen whale to return to save Zhuan. However, her action was immediately intercepted by the first mountain god not far away. "What are you doing?" The black-veiled woman looked coldly at the first mountain god. The first mountain god's eyes were indifferent. He waved his sleeve and released a group of Ryuka people in the Azure Dragon Hall. They looked around in confusion. "You are too weak to be Yang Yi's opponent. Take care of these Ryuka descendants. Otherwise, Zhuan's sacrifice will be in vain." After that, the first mountain god took the Azure Dragon Hall and rushed out in the direction of Zhuan. The black-veiled woman stared at the first mountain god in a daze. She fell into a state of absent-mindedness. In the end, she silently put down her hands that were making hand seals. The black-veiled woman looked up and stared at the distant figure that was slowly descending in the starry sky. She suddenly felt a little pain in her heart. She had worked hard enough, but in the end, she still couldn't help Zhuan. She suddenly felt that she was a failure. Long Shan and Feng Xiao looked up and stared at the figure that was descending in the starry sky. Lord Longwen. Not only Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao, but the group of Ryuka people also looked up. The confusion in their eyes was gone. Instead, they were full of worry. Although the dazzling starlight saber shadow was beautiful, its power was extremely terrifying. Even from afar, one could clearly feel how terrifying this saber shadow was. Zhuan quietly stared at the descending saber shadow. At this moment, he was extremely calm, so calm that it was terrifying. He slowly grasped the hilt of his sword. He planned to use the 6th sword. Although this sword would cost his life, he had no other choice. Death was imminent, but the closer he was to death, the calmer Zhuan was. However, his only regret was indeed Mu Chenshue. "Chen Shui, I will die if I lose this battle. When I die, I will be reborn in the spirit ring and we will be together forever." Muttering in a low voice, Zhuan slowly pulled out the 6th sword. As soon as this sword was pulled out, a fierce and unyielding sword chi soared into the sky. This sword chi became more and more terrifying. The column formed by the sword chi pierced the sky as if it was going to pierce through the sky. "Since I'm going to die anyway, I'll give this sword to you, Yang Yi." Zhuan suddenly turned his head and looked at Yang Yi behind the saber shadow. He suddenly pulled out the sixth sword. The originally turbulent and terrifying sword qi suddenly stagnated and then began to shrink. This sword qi condensed into an insignificant point, which was even several times smaller than a fingernail. The sword qi condensed at an extremely fast speed. It rushed out of the range of the saber shadow and arrived in front of Yang Yi. Yang Yi clearly felt the threat of the sword qi. He narrowed his eyes and involuntarily took a few steps back. Then he stretched out his right hand and an independent void appeared in front of him, forming a thick void wall. Bang bang bang. Unfortunately, under the bombardment of the sword qi, the huge void walls were shattered and pierced through one after another. After all the void walls were shattered, Yang Yi's eyes were calm. He waved his right hand and the void beside him split open. He stepped into the void crack and prepared to dodge the sword qi. Unfortunately, the sword qi was not simple. The moment the void cracked open, the sword qi exploded. Countless sword qi flew in all directions and turned into a huge blurry figure. This figure was tens of thousands of feet tall. It held an ordinary iron sword in its hand and slowly waved it. Just by waving it, the void crack completely collapsed. Yang Yi was forced out of the void with a gloomy look in his eyes. Whoosh! You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.